Boy, for those who are also watching during our playthrough of the base game Tales of Zestiria, isn't it weird to open up on the beginning of the stream and see only 4 characters on the main menu screen as opposed to the 6 that we got so accustomed to by the end of Tales of Zestiria? Welcome back to Tales of Praxis, everyone. I'm your host, Aaron Suduko, with my co-host making a guest appearance, Evie the Corgi, also saying hi. Gotta take the graceful, quiet moment of her just hanging out and smiling as opposed to ferociously barking and squeaking her bone in the background for her to say hi as well. Grail, my dear friend, hello, welcome back. I'm glad that you're going to be on this next leg of the journey with us as well. Let me get the camera back here. For those who don't know, withtheterriblefate.com is your online home for all of the most rigorous, in-depth, and passionate literary analyses of your favorite video game stories. If that strikes you as an unusual combination of words, strongly encourage you to go to withtheterriblefate.com. Check out what we do. It's primarily long-form written content, but we also have podcasts. We also have wonderful streaming adventure, book club style things here on Twitch, such as this. And we also have lectures at conventions, such as our upcoming talk at PAX West over Labor Day weekend about whether or not the Pokemon series qualifies as a JRPG. So we are your multimedia home for video game stories. Yeah, good evening, Grail. How you doing? It is a stormy evening here in Colorado after a day of brutal sun and I think temperatures in the 90s. So we're chilling literally and metaphorically over here. It's been a bit of a stormy DLC so far, in a good way, I think. So the weather kind of matches as it did for the conclusion of Zestiria. Yeah, or it seems like that's kind of the weather that's sweeping the nation. For those who might be watching and are less familiar with the Tales of Praxis series, it's something that I kicked off specifically for With a Terrible Fate back in March. It's just a streaming and analytical article series that is dedicated to Namco's Tales JRPGs. It's one focus. We're going through various adventures, reviewing some of the games that I've played before and playing some that I've never played before, both on and off the stream, and also publishing analytical studies of them on withtheterriblefate.com. Encourage you to check those out. Ardently hoping to get some more out in the near future. I think my struggle is, and I've talked about this on the stream before, when you love games enough to think about and study and publish on them, you're always kind of being pulled in several directions at the same time, where you want to think about the games and talk about the games and also sit down and play the games and write and publish on the games. And so I think I underestimated how much I would enjoy just the experience of being sucked back into these worlds and these stories and this mode of storytelling that was so formative for me as a kid. And so every time I sit down to write, I end up picking up another Tales game, which is all part of the series because, we're replaying the games, we're studying them, but I just get sucked into it and dialed in and stuck in, and all of my time goes to playing as opposed to writing and working on it from that angle. All of which is to say, I have continued to pound through the last few hours of Tales of Berseria, which is even longer than I realized it was last stream when I was talking about how much longer it was than I remembered. I think I'm on hour 72 or 73, and I am just at Tarkaros, the final dungeon now. The party hasn't even stormed the gates yet, so definitely a different cadence to your typical Tales JRPG. Yeah, long and interestingly long. We'll definitely take time to talk more about it once I'm done, Grail. But one thing that was keeping me going on it today and yesterday was, we were talking about how it feels like the plot kind of goes in a bunch of different directions and it's really hard to tie it all together. It was actually interesting to me, even more so than the really interesting and illuminating side content and a lot of the other Tales JRPGs. The more I've been diving into the side quests that are available to me at this point in Vesperia, the more I feel like it actually does shed a lot of light on not just, the characters and their motivations and where they came from, but also just like what was going on behind the scenes in the plot that ties a bunch of different elements together. Like, oh, go on a side quest and suddenly you stumble on this whole hidden explanation of what Alexei was doing in the first part of the game. Or, oh, stumble on this EX dungeon and suddenly you get all of this new insight into the Children of the Full Moon, this mysterious kind of proto race that plays a big role in the game, but we'll talk about it more once I'm done with it. I don't want to spoil too much for people who haven't played it either. Suffice to say, it's been an interesting journey, like my journeys through all of these games as part of the Tales of Praxis series have been. So yeah, we started out with the series thinking about Tales of Symphonia, and then its sequel, Dawn of the New World. Then we did Zestiria, which we can now say we've wrapped, finally. Also, speaking of long Tales games, that was probably the longest stream to date. Now we're working through Blind for the first time. It's DLC, Alisha's Story. This is our second stream of that, and then we'll be diving right into Tales of Berseria after that. I think it's safe to say, I mean, Grail, tell me what you think, because our dear friend Grail also watched and was with us for the first of these streams, but I'm really enjoying the DLC so far. I feel like it's refreshing and cool to see a DLC that just follows up on the end of the main story in a video game in a way that feels warranted and gives you a little different perspective on characters that weren't explored in as involved a way in the main game, but also does so in a way that seems to be digging up a lot of themes and probing further things that the first game was clearly concerned with. Not just with Alisha trying to figure out who she is and what she wants to do and what duty she wants to choose, as opposed to which duty she just feels bound by based on her birth or her lineage or her role as a knight. But also, you know, Rose taking up a new role in an unexplained way as of yet. The fact that she's now acting as a shepherd, and even, and I think probably most interesting to me right now, Simone and how she's coping with her place in the world after the fall of the one person who ever valued her or saw her as anything worthwhile in the world, even if it was purely instrumental, namely Heldolf, the Lord of Calamity. So a lot of interesting characters, familiar faces with new schemes and ambitions in the mix. Maybe Lunar is still here. I'm not sure how or why that would be the case. So we're headed to Camlon, where I'm hoping we'll maybe end the DLC with a nice, beautiful shot of Saray in stasis, hibernating with Mautellus like we get on the title screen. I feel like that would be a beautiful kind of symmetry to wrap things up with. But we already saw Alisha kind of working through her own trauma and therapizing herself, actually with the help of Simone, when she reenacted that really heart-wrenching confrontation with Maltran as we were working through the cave system. And now, I think, if memory serves, we just ventured through some mountains and are on the cusp of entering some ruins on the way into Camlon from the Roland side. I think that brings us about up to current. Yeah, I think a lot of the Zestiria DNA in terms of the navigation and the themes and everything else, Grail, except as we were talking about kind of missing the important DNA element of armadization, but even that is clearly a very deliberate choice to kind of give the DLC contours that are different but related to the main game. Yeah, well, I'm glad you're getting further into Berseria. I will remind you, you have gone out of your way to make your run of it much harder than it needs to be. And if anyone else is watching the stream or the YouTube VOD after the fact, Grail is doing homework for the upcoming stream. God bless you, Grail. By working through a Tales of Berseria replay, and has also elected to make it a challenge run, kind of, I would say, on the tier or near tier of Pokemon Nuzlocke. Maybe that's a little extreme because Nuzlockes are brutal depending on the way that people structure them, but you are definitely playing a Tales game in much more hardcore fashion in terms of making character deaths a little more real for gameplay than I would ever have the guts or wherewithal to do. So more power to you, my friend. And on that fine note, I'm delighted to get back into it. Let's do it. Let's see what else this DLC has in store, what it wants to say to us. I want to make sure we restocked before we abandon our fair weather friend, the Dark Turtles. All right, onward. Elaine Ruins. This is new background music, I think. I like those. Or maybe a slight remix of something from the base game. Let's see how our levels are stacking up with the random encounters. 85. So we had an edge going into this, I think because of New Game Plus, but it's interesting. They very quickly ramped the enemies such that we're not under-leveled, but we're right at par with them. I think one of the things I really respect about what you're doing, Grail, is that kind of as this most recent message of yours suggests, it's a good way to force yourself to actually learn how to be really good at the game's battle system. Because I know I have this experience a lot, and I have to imagine it's common to a lot of Tales players, and maybe just JRPG players more broadly. I will very quickly, in my own Tales playthrough, find one character I want to control in battles. Typically, it's the, what have you been calling that character in terms of video game narrative structure? The perspective character, the one who kind of focalizes the way in which you see events. But sometimes not, like I've been saying in this Berseria playthrough, because of the little real-world doggy of mine who made her guest appearance at the beginning of the stream, I decided to main Rapide in the parties. But so all that to say, like, I very quickly find a character who makes sense to me, a moveset that I'm comfortable with, and then I kind of forget about the rest of the gameplay and the other characters and all of the other more nuanced systems that the game wants you to take the time to explore, whether that's something like, you know, all of the like weapon fusion and skill optimization and grid management in Zestiria, or even kind of more straightforward systems like skill management in Vesperia. And I think that's kind of a shame, because you do get a whole different appreciation for the game, I think, when you force yourself to really explore all of the characters, you know, get a facility with the way that they play. Because especially in these more recent games, I think they really do go out of their way to at least try to give the different playable characters distinct play styles, and you really don't get a sense of that unless you know, make the effort to sit down and actually play as all the different characters. Like the difference in how Genus plays as a mage versus how Rita plays as a mage, forget about it. They were clearly trying to do very cool and interesting things with just the different kinds of builds that spellcasters could have, but you can't really appreciate that unless you play as them. And so, and meanwhile, here I am playing as a dog instead. So, and yeah, it definitely takes effort, and I think needs to be a conscious choice. Otherwise, it simply won't happen. But my hat is off to you for making that effort. Yeah, you'll have to share kind of some of your insights from that mode of playing it with us as we go through our very different playthrough of it coming soon. I really wish we had food. How are our levels? Oh yeah, so actually now the Seraphim are underleveled, but Alisha and Rose are right at par with the enemies. Interesting. Yeah, I've been trying to get better about that as I get older, because, as I was just saying, I do think that's a big part of what it is to understand the game and really, you know, even understand the nature of these characters, right? I think in a JRPG like the Tales games, so much of a character's personality and the way that they approach and engage with the world and each other really is shown in cool and interesting and sometimes pretty subtle ways through their gameplay. So I definitely agree with you. I think my problem is, one, I'm really lazy in general in terms of trying new systems once I get comfortable in a game. Two, once I get sort of my setup in a game, I feel like typically enough time has passed and the enemies have got gotten strong enough, like it's 5 or 10 hours in, that then I feel like I'll be giving myself a pretty significant handicap to be kind of starting over, playing as a character with whom I have no familiarity. And then 3, in the Tales games, this may be kind of unfair, but given the fact that sometimes there'll be like specific combat sequences or parts of the story where you only get access to the perspective character, like Lloyd or Yuri or Luke or whomever, I feel like I almost need to prioritize playing as them just so I'm not totally out to sea and disoriented and don't know how to get through the game when I'm thrown into situations in the story where I have to play as them. But at the end of the day, those just boil down to 3 excuses. Well, Grail, you're inspiring me. I might just take you as inspiration and try to mix it up with more of the party as I play through the rest of the Tales games, because God knows we have plenty to get through yet in Tales of Praxis, and there'll be a way to get even more out of them. In fact, why don't I put my money where my mouth is? We can play as Rose for a little bit, even though this is Alicia's story. Since they give you the option, we might as well take advantage of it, right? Let's take a look at her art settings. Fangblade, that's an OG art. I can hear Luke saying it a million times in my head. Fangblade! Fangblade! Better late than never, Grail. Better late than never. Hey, Itchy and Titchy. That is such a good question, but kind of an impossible question, I think. Something that I'm very fond of saying on the stream is I think part of why it's fun to play a bunch of JRPGs in a series, like the Tales series, back to back like this, is you really get a sense of the very different things that each game is trying to do and the different stories that they're trying to tell. And so I have a really hard time ranking them. Rather, I kind of appreciate them all for different reasons and for the different things that they're trying to say. I think most recently I've said on the stream, kind of based on the ones that I have replayed very recently, my favorite right now in terms of the one that I just keep coming back to as kind of the most interesting content for just me as an adult and that I think about even in the real world beyond the game is Tales of the Abyss. But, I mean, that's one of the magical things about the series. I think the harder you look at any one of the games in the series, the more you can find really interesting and magical things no matter which game it is. If I just said Abyss instead of, Tales of the Abyss, Grail? Is that what you're saying? Is that too long a title for you? Should I shorthand it? In my head, I'll oftentimes say TOTA because the abbreviation in the fan community is capital T, lowercase OT, capital A, but I don't feel like that translates especially well into vocalized speech as opposed to the written word. Oh, are you saying that Abyss is clearly my favorite? So I shouldn't be hedging it? I have a lot of love for the Abyss, but I'm serious. I mean, one of the reasons that I always say the 3 paragraphs is that I really don't feel like the other games are inferior to it. I just find that, as much as anything, probably because of the big written analysis that I did of it on With a Terrible Fate a couple months ago, I just find that my mind is more actively with it than it is with a lot of the other ones. But they're all additive. That's one of the reasons that I love the series so much is the just the fact that the more you play a number of them, the more you can see how deeply they're all in conversation with one another. Like I was going through, not even the main story, but like a really interesting end game side quest, just a throwaway scene at an inn in Vesperia. And it was like such a clear and cool homage to the conversation that the Swordians have in Tales of Destiny, of all games, before like the run up to the final battle, which was like I never would have gotten or appreciated that if I hadn't just played Tales of Destiny before it. Yeah, I definitely feel what you're saying about only being able to access certain ones, itchy and titchy. Like, I don't know off the top of my head how the Europe releases differ from the North America ones, but we too have only had access to certain ones. I mean, a lot of them never left, like Japan and other like Eastern markets. So I've been scheming as part of Tales of Praxis to figure out whether and how to get my hands on like fan localized versions of the ones that we never got, because I'd really like to be able to play all of them. But I'm definitely going to at least play all the ones that got official localizations. That's right, Grail. We now have the OP move Scrap Toss back, which, as we know, is what game is all about. And you know, Itchy and Titchy, I have so much love for Tales of Symphonia. Also, I don't know if you were here when I was saying this, but kind of the inspiration for this streaming series and the article series I'm doing on withaterriblefate.com was the release of the remastered version of Tales of Symphonia, because Symphonia, when I was growing up, it was the very first video game story that I played. It was a big part of what inspired me to fall in love with the medium and take it seriously as a mode of storytelling. And I played that game so many times. I know it like the back of my hand, and I think it really did influence the way I think about the world and art and philosophy and everything else. So I think where I'm at right now is it's kind of similar to, honestly, the way I feel about a lot of game series. Like when it comes to The Legend of Zelda, at least before Tears of the Kingdom came out, what I got in the habit of saying was like, I think in terms of the most interesting and like philosophically sophisticated story that's told in the series, I think that's 100% Majora's Mask. But in terms of the game that was sort of the most personally meaningful to me and what I thought was like the most special, it was Twilight Princess. So those two things kind of diverge a little bit. And I think I'm kind of the same way with the Tales series, where like I think sort of the one that's been the most intellectually rewarding for me in recent times and that I keep coming back to is Tales of the Abyss. So I think that has a special kind of more adult place in my heart, even though I also played it as a kid. It's just meant more to me and evolved as I've grown up. But in terms of the one that is like near and dear to my heart and will always have a place that none of the other ones have, that would definitely be Symphonia as well. And this is almost an article I might write at some point too, because especially going back and playing it and then thinking about it in comparison to some of the other Tales games, it really feels to me almost like the perfect fairy tale. Like there's something almost just magical and fantastical about it, and really heartwarming about the characters it represents and the lessons that it wants to teach you. Like it's a very serious and sobering story. I mean, you start out with basically concentration camps at the beginning, and it only gets more serious and intense from there. But there's something that's very kind of like just, I guess optimistic is the right word for it. Like wholesome and uplifting in the way that like a fairy tale is. Not Brothers Grimm fairy tales, but more like the sorts of fairy tales that you would tell to inspire your kids. Yeah, Hearts is one that I have not played yet, but it is flying through the air to me in a package as we speak, so I'm very excited to play it after all of the love that I've heard people have for it. Oh, well, that's a relief, Grail. I'm glad they fixed that. I was worried that we would have to go through like 50 to 60 more hours of the cramped camera view.
We mustn't underestimate the malevolence.
Was Symphonia also your first Tales game, Itchy and Titchy, or did you start with something else and then just fall in love with Symphonia afterwards? I love Graces, yo. I'm really excited to replay that, because that's another one I haven't played in years. But man, also talk about ones that stick with you. That one, like, I still just sit and think about the ending of that sometimes. I think it's a really intimate and thoughtful one. And I wrote a very small amount about it, actually, at the end of the study I published a few years ago on Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Plato. And I say this half in jest, but I seriously think that a significant part of why I wrote that study about Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was kind of as a Trojan horse to think a little bit more about very similar ideas in Graces, because I was so taken with that world and its story. Yeah, I loved everything from the intro of Graces to the end. I agree with you, Itchy and Titchy. I feel like the whole intro sequence to Graces is such an interesting and kind of like somewhat modernized like homage and also twist on like the storytelling mechanics of Ocarina of Time. And a very unusual thing to do in something like a Tales-style JRPG. Which art are you talking about, Grail? Which one of these is a Leon art? No. I did not say that. And if you quote me as saying that, I will find you in Ohio and I will get you, Grail. Nah, I'm playing. It's so similar in some ways, and so very deeply different in others. Yeah, I was like 90% sure it was Glimmer Dragon. You don't get him for that long in the original version. That's one of the many reasons that I want to play the director's cut, is really just I think it's so cool that they did a like chain of memory style total other half to the story. And he's such a like tragic and interesting character. I'd love to see more of him. Better do a memory wipe, Grail, or I'll do one for you. I'll go over to your pod in the Matrix body field and reset all of your systems. These dangerous encounters really are dangerous, my friends. Damn, I hope the boss fights remain manageable, at least with how quickly these enemies are scaling up. I feel like we're blowing through all of our resources just to stay alive in these random encounters. It does not feel good. Yeah, what's up with that? I mean, I know we've been talking about this, Grail, but like the balance between random encounters and boss fights in Zestiria in particular is just hard for me to wrap my little brain around. Yeah, of course not. It's not like they're bosses or anything. Unlike these random grunts, they've never achieved anything in their sad, small lives. At least the music is great. That's a leitmotif in this song from the base game, I think, right? That do 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 do. It almost, in my head, it felt like it was maybe an allusion to a different game or a different score, but I think I'm just losing my mind by switching back and forth between Zestiria and Vesperia, depending on what time of day it is. Are perilous encounters literally the same, Grail, or do they have different mechanics? I don't remember.
That was radiant, Edna. Suppose I could learn from your level of reserve.
I will say, I think Legendia is going to be the ultimate test of my Tales of Praxis attitude of really giving all of these games another chance as an adult, because, like, I know we've talked about how I didn't really enjoy Dawn of the New World the first time through, and how I didn't feel like I understood Vesperia, but man, Tales of Legendia, I remember just like grumbling out loud to my TV in my parents' basement the whole time I was working through that. So I desperately want to give it another chance, but I wouldn't say I'm looking forward to giving it another chance. Yeah, well, it would make sense if perilous encounters and dangerous encounters are the same, given that perilous and dangerous are synonyms. I guess that's consistent, at least. I would say, for what it's worth, Itchy, especially if you played Dawn of the New World quite a while ago and never touched it again, and especially if you're a huge fan of Tales of Symphonia, as you say, it is worth going right into Dawn of the New World after a Tales of Symphonia run with just fresh eyes and giving it a chance and asking yourself, like, okay, I understand that this is not the same as Tales of Symphonia, but what might it be trying to say, and what are the points of its differences, and how is it kind of in conversation with that game? That was a big part of what my stream of it was all about on Tales of Praxis, and all of the VODs of that are on With the Terrible Fates YouTube channel if you're interested in checking out some of the stuff that I was thinking about it. But because I similarly, had no desire to go back to it after my first time playing it, but going through it again, with more games under my belt and fresh eyes, years later, really changed my opinion about it in, I would say, a positive way. It's just, and with regard to Legendia Grail, I think this is another thing where my perspective has totally changed as I've gotten a little older and just thought more about, what it means to experience a video game story and stuff like that. Because when I was a kid, I can tell you all of the like little differences in Tales game, like if the battle system were a little different or the world felt different, I would be so mad that it didn't feel exactly the same as the other games that I really love, and my inclination would be to say like, oh, it's doing something wrong or it's not as good. Now, when a game is more divergent from the norms of the series, even something like Zestiria, where I've been having like a hard time with some of the combat and navigation systems over the course of the game, I'm more interested because my initial reaction is saying something more like, oh, okay, the team was trying to do something that was like a departure from the series or mixing things up in a way that probably had a point. Let's try to figure out what that point is and how that relates to the broader series. And the thing that I think I was not willing to understand, or I think even play through at the time in Legendia, that speaks to that philosophy, was the whole, I forget what they're called, like character quests or something, but like the little, like the kind of side plots, but not side plots that like you get in the post game with all of the party characters after you finish the very short main story. And I just didn't understand as a kid like how that was supposed to work or what they were trying to do. So I think I truly just played through the main story and then left like probably about half of the game unplayed because I wasn't willing to like entertain the possibility of this very different kind of story that the game was trying to tell. So that's part of why I am kind of interested, at least, in replaying it, even if I don't feel like it's going to become my favorite one, because I think it definitely had things it was trying to do that I just was not ready to entertain as a kid. Oh boy, y'all are sending so many messages. I want to keep up while we continue working through this. Grail, I still wish I could go back in time to understand like what was going on with little Aaron with the raw number of hours he sunk into Dawn of the New World. Yeah, I had a file with like at least 200 hours, I think more, and like maxed out characters and everything. I think just because I know how obsessive I can get about this stuff, it was because I was really trying to get all of the monsters in the party and optimize everything and this, that, and the other. I think I've definitely gotten better over the years about only putting that much care and effort into the games I'm really invested in, whereas as a kid I felt obligated to, like, if I started a game, I was going to grind through it as much as possible. Itchy, I have not done Eternia yet. That is another one that is literally on its way to me as we speak, because the two holes in my library actually were just Eternia and Hearts, in terms of stuff that's been released in the US. So now the library is going to be filled out, and I'm really excited to play it because I know that's another one that is just a beloved fan favorite that's kind of flown under the radar in modern times. So I'm excited for that. Thank you for the quick save reminder, Grail. God bless you. Yeah, here, Itchy. So while we're kind of at a semi-natural pause, I'll send you the there's a series page that lives on withaterriblefate.com. So With a Terrible Fate is a publication that I'm the founder of. We've been around for the better part of a decade at this point. We're dedicated just to studying the storytelling of video games, so sort of doing like very close reading literary studies of them and trying to figure out why their stories work the way they do, what they're trying to say, why that's special to gamers, everything like that. And Tales of Praxis is a series that I started back in March when Tales of Symphonia, the remastered version, came out, basically with the goal of doing two things. First, kicking off a streaming adventure for the publication, because we've never done streaming before, but replaying and revisiting a lot of the Tales games that sort of shaped my experience and perspective as a gamer growing up. I'm a philosopher of video game storytelling, so I've kind of dedicated a big portion of my intellectual life and life in general to thinking about the stories of video games. And the Tales series kind of kicked that off and inspired me to do that in a lot of ways. So I wanted to revisit the games through that dimension. And then I've also been publishing some companion written analytical articles, which is more of what we typically do for the publication, digging into what is it about these stories that make them so special, how are the different games in conversation with one another, how they influenced video game storytelling more broadly. So I've got a lot of backlogged article ideas and stuff I'm working on in that dimension, but the stream has been a very fun adventure so far. We started with Symphonia, then we did Dawn of the New World. This is basically the conclusion of our Zestiria playthrough, and then we're going to do Berseria after that, and then TBD what we do after that. I've also, on my own off-stream, done playthroughs of Tales of the Abyss as part of Tales of Praxis, which if you check out the site, there's a lengthy study on Tales of the Abyss and why I think that's a really interesting and valuable game as a spiritual practice, not just as a video game story. And also did Tales of Destiny, and I'm now finishing up a replay of Tales of Vesperia. So a lot of stuff to study, a lot of content to look forward to in the best of ways. Hey Grail, if you set up that kind of easy command bot, I will be the first one to use it. I'm begging you, make my life easier. Grail, you are more generous than I deserve to say that this stream will make you giga-brained, but I will say, the entire conceit of With a Terrible Fate is just thinking basically really hard about games as works of storytelling and how they do things like the kind of stuff you would talk about in an English class with books, except better because they're video games, and that's awesome. So if you're into especially like games for the sake of story and thinking about why that is, I do definitely think that's our niche. We're the only publication and kind of online source or anywhere source that thinks about them in this particular way. So if you hang out, you'll probably at least get an invitation to see some aspect of these games storytelling in a cool and interesting new way. That's my pitch for that. Yeah, Itchy, I haven't played the Xillia games yet. I've had this interesting experience where more than once at very different points in my life, I picked up the first Xillia, and then for whatever reason, I think mostly just bad timing on my part, I ended up putting it down and just not being ready to get through it. But especially since we started out the stream with two duologies in the Tales series, that is Symphonia and then Dawn of the New World, and now Zestiria to be followed by Berseria, doing Xillia and then Xillia 2 would kind of fit the framework that we've set up for ourselves. So I don't know. I'm not committing to it yet, but it could be fun. And I am really excited to get to them, because that's the other thing that I love, going back and making a point to play through the whole series as someone who loved it but played it pretty casually growing up. Every time I get to a game that I've never played before, even DLC like this, it feels like just Christmas in a box, like a totally new, virgin territory in a series that I love, and just such a special storytelling language that really doesn't show up, I would say, even in like similar JRPG series. I think in a lot of ways, just this Tales series has a special nature to it that you don't get anywhere else.
So this is the power of purification. My powers aren't much, but I try.
Wow, Grail, I am very jealous of... Oh, Grail, excuse me. No, that was Itchy. I'm not used to having more than one person in the chat because our stream is still young and niche. Itchy, I am very jealous of that trophy you have, that special edition of Xillia. The crown jewel of my collection is just the Tales of Destiny Director's Cut Collector's Edition that was only released in Japan, and that I truly just stumbled upon when I wasn't looking for it in a store in Akihabara when I was over in Japan a few years ago visiting my friend and colleague Dan Hughes. And that's just absolutely beautiful. And I had the wonderful experience of playing through like the original Tales of Destiny, which is PS1 old school graphics, very kind of lo-fi. And then I took out the collector's edition, and it has this beautiful 170 page or something art book with just incredibly detailed illustrations of all of the characters and some of the key moments in the game. And just being able to look at that right after playing the game just added a whole other layer to me for the game. I really loved that. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me about Hideo Ichi. I mean, one of the things that we've talked about so much on the stream is you can tell what a labor of love all these games are for the people who are involved in them. So it's a special thing to see that borne out in your experience. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, one of the things that you'll notice if you stick around too, Itchy, just looking at your comment about story versus gameplay, definitely with you in terms of the value of plot, and we also talk a lot about gameplay systems. One of the things that I think gives With a Terrible Fate a kind of different perspective than most video game studies you'll find online is when we say video games as a form of storytelling, it's really thinking about the whole package of a video game as telling a story. And so you'll see us talk about things on the stream or in the articles that are really comments on the gameplay systems. So, the different ways in which you're able to interact with the game as the player, or different movesets the characters have as actually components of the story, and ask okay, if only certain characters are able to armatize in Zestiria, and sometimes that's not available, or you can only armatize under certain circumstances for certain amounts of time. What does that tell us about the nature of this world and the themes that the story is talking about? So we really see it as all connected in that way, and we've gotten a lot of mileage and enjoyment out of asking those sorts of questions that you wouldn't get a lot of other places on the stream as we've gone through these games. Yeah, it's funny. I love the series so much, Grail, but it's also not one where I've ever gone out of my way to reserve collector's editions or stuff like that. I don't have the collector's edition for Tales of Arise. I kind of find I don't know if this says more about the series itself or my relationship to it versus other games, because I collect a lot and I have a lot of collector's editions for games, but maybe just because I like the idea of Tales being an ongoing part of my life. I kind of like the cadence of just, like I said about my time in Japan, stumbling upon various things that I can add to my collection organically, as opposed to trying to get the brand new shiny collector's edition whenever that comes out. I found in Japan that director's cut collector's edition for Destiny, and then also the other thing that is, I guess, the other crown jewel of my collection right now, this anniversary, I think the 10-year anniversary soundtrack that they put out, which is beautiful. It was just on a bottom shelf in this unassuming black box, so I don't even know how my eyes were drawn to it, except I guess that's just how I am about this series. But it's got, a beautiful collection of the songs from throughout all of the first games through at least Tales of Symphonia. I think maybe that's where it stops, Symphonia or Legendia. But then also a pin set with, I think, 1 or 2 pins highlighting all of the characters from those early games. So I'm a big sucker for pins. Whenever I lecture at cons, I always have 1 or 2 pins to show the gamer flair. And actually, because my lecture in Boston at PAX East this past year, where the hell are we going? Totally in the wrong direction. When I gave that lecture, it was right as I was kicking off the Tales of Symphonia stream. And so I dusted off that pin collection, which I had never actually worn. And I took out the pin that they included of Kratos Orion. And so if you watch the VOD of that lecture, you'll see my Majora's Mask pin, which I almost always wear because the site's name, of course, is an homage to Majora's Mask. And then Kratos hanging out on my lapel as well. Yeah, my Tales of Fantasia Game Boy Advance box is a little worse for wear, Itchy. I don't know if it would qualify as complete in box anymore because I flattened it more than once as a kid. But yeah, I remember many happy hours with that game. Because I found it at a magical time after I'd played a lot of Symphonia and I think some of the other games, and I was kind of just getting to the point where I was interested enough in games to be interested in their history and want to go back to the earlier ones. And so I discovered, like, oh, the first Tales game ever, and I can play it on my Game Boy Advance SP. You better believe I'm going to do that. And yeah, many happy times with that.
That was radiant, Edna. Suppose I could learn from your level of reserve. That was a difficult battle. Let's restore our vitality.
Yeah, I respect that mindset, Itchy. I do that with a lot of my collection stuff too. I am way too addicted to collecting basically anything that I care about, whether that's games or I'm also big on like card games and Legos. So all of my hobbies are fun and too expensive, which I know, say what you will about that. In terms of games, though, I feel like most of I'm bad at like buying collector's editions on top of like regular editions for games that I want to play, and I don't buy like any versions of games that I don't want to play, which means in practice that typically whatever version I have of a game that I get, I'm going to open and actually play. I think maybe the one recent exception to that, well, maybe not so recent anymore, but for whatever reason, you know, back when I started with A Terrible Fate, the kind of origin of its name and of the site more broadly was some of my first work in the philosophy of video game storytelling was a very in-depth study of the storytelling of Majora's Mask, which was inspired by Nintendo remaking it for the 3DS. And so it took me so much effort, but because the game was so important to me and kind of my professional and philosophical trajectory, I wanted to get all of the collectible goodies, and it took so much effort because I had to get so many different things. I had to get a copy of this 3DS game that I think no one has played called Codename Steam, because that was the only way to get the like special steel Majora's Mask pin that I was talking about that I wear all the time. I have the special 3DS console, that's the beautiful golden console with the masks. And then to get around to the reason that I brought it up, one of the few like collector's edition games that I never opened was the version of that has the statue of Skull Kid, because I think probably because the box itself is very beautiful, and it has like, it's a box with the background art of the game, and then there's a cutout in the shape of Majora's Mask, and you can see the statue through that. So I think the whole like sealed package is kind of a really nice testament to the game and its artistry. Yeah, I definitely got the collector's edition of Symphonia Remastered, also Grail.
Do you have anything? I'm not hiding.
The stickers are fantastic, but also, oh my goodness, the Corinne steel case, like I would have gotten it just for that. That is beautiful and so adorable and so touching, and I love Corinne as a character. It's just, they really knew what they were doing and what that game was about. Good question, Grail. Funny question. I actually did shout out Ben Drowned, I think, exactly once during my analysis of Majora's Mask. And I think the thing about it, like jokes and memes aside, that I think is really special is it shows the extent to which I think the Majora's Mask story and the world of Termina just captures something really like primordial and mythological and almost folkloric. Like it really just scratches, I think, at sort of something lizard brain and very old in like the human psyche, because like you play it and it's almost impossible to play it without wanting to interpret it or, tell some creepypasta about it, or just like extend the story in some way like Ben Drown does. And I think that really speaks to just the, in the first place, the artistic quality and sophistication of video games, but also like just the special kind of inscrutable and uncomfortable nature of what Nintendo made with that. Actually, I forget whether I was talking about this, just catching up on the messages and seeing you two talking about Halo. We've talked a lot on the stream, because of course it's Tales, how can you not, about the value of the lost art of couch co-op, when you could actually sit down and do things like split screen with your friends in games, because games were still being made to support that. And one of my fondest memories of my undergrad experience in college was whenever my roommate and I needed a study break, we would just boot up Halo 4 on my Xbox 360, go into online matchmaking, and just grind out some play sessions with strangers online. And that was such a just like, not just therapeutic experience, but also like a really special bonding experience. Like, shout out to my roommate Alex, because he watches the stream sometimes, but I really think part of why we became and have remained so close was the hours we logged in Halo together. And also, like, as someone who has never considered himself good at FPS, like, put in enough hours procrastinating study time and you will get good. Like, we were mowing people down by the conclusion of our senior year. But I do also remember, funny enough, that you call out the Halo story, Itchy, because I think it was when Halo 5 came out, the first one for the Xbone. My same roommate, Alex, played through the campaign, and I was struck by the amount of attention that they gave to the story. It was interesting. It was much more challenging than I expected for, your standard FPS. And I remember thinking, like, that was one of the first games that got me thinking, back in like 2015, 2016, okay, so many developers have been focused on optimizing and improving graphics and making their games seem really lifelike and run really fast. But eventually those factors are going to kind of plateau, right? And it's going to be harder to make games seem more hyper-realistic, and people aren't going to really want that. And so I think more and more developers, I said to myself at that time, looking at Halo, are going to realize it's actually like a competitive advantage in the market to distinguish your game and actually get people to buy it, to tell a really interesting and engaging story in a way that's interesting and unlike other stories on the market in your niche. And I think over and over again since then, in the following years, games have proven that point of mine. They're only continuing to lean into story as a differentiating factor. And I love that. I think it's fantastic. I hope games continue to do it, because we're really still just on like the starting line of everything that games can accomplish when it comes to storytelling and their sheer artistry, in my view. All right, let's see how what look like bosses stack up to the random encounters we've been having. I'm just catching up on your messages before we roll into this. Yeah, honestly, maybe this is part of why I should just get into fighting games, Grail, because I miss couch co-op so much. It was nuts. Like, when my friend and colleague Matt McGill hung out here like a month or so ago, when we weren't streaming Dawn of the New World together, we took some time to, because we wanted some game to play together, and like the only thing I had that was kind of couch co-op-y was one of the Call of Duties that was like free a while ago on PlayStation, and the amount of effort you had to go through just to find like local split screen play, because they had hidden it away in favor of all their other game types, was ludicrous. Like, they don't want people playing it that way. They want you just defaulting it to, one person, one console, one screen, and it's really sad to see so many of them going that way. Oh, I think I are y'all talking about like a Discord for With a Terrible Fate? Because that actually, I mean, tell me. I'll give you guys this quick spiel about like the background of the site, and then we'll dive into the fight. I am very technically challenged when it comes to Discord because I think just it got popular at a point in my life when I decided I'm not interested in learning that many more like online communication systems. So I am on it, and you know I navigate servers and things like that. So we do have we have an internal With a Terrible Fate Discord for the analysts collaborating together and working on stuff and talking about their projects. I've thought about opening it up to the broader community before, but I honestly just haven't known the best way to do that or whether there'd be any interest. So if you think that would be a useful supplement to everything that we do between the written articles and the streams and everything else, let me know and I can look more into it. But yeah, there's not one as of yet, but that could change. You are talking to the guy who would make that happen if it's something that interests you. All right, let's do this. Onward. Okay, we have Ritra and Kadru. You going to be my Wikipedia support, Grail? You going to tell me if these names also belong to the deep lore of some obscure mythology with which I'm not familiar? Because they don't mean anything to me, but they sound like those sorts of mythological names. You know, a thing that's confusing me? I keep losing my focus in these fights, not just because of the great conversation we're having, but because I don't know if this is something I can also change in the menu, but I keep looking to the left-hand side of the screen because that's where I'm used to the playable character's stats being. And then I have to remind myself, oh, that's right, I'm not playing as Alisha right now, I'm playing as Rose. And that's like 3 more steps of logic than I need for these sorts of fights. Yeah, we are actually pretty well known within our niche at this point, Grail, which is an honor for me. Definitely not so much in the streaming community because we just started out, and truly, like the majority of our work has been written long form articles. But we have had the privilege of having some success and recognition in terms of that sort of more bread and butter of our work. Okay, there you go. So there are religious connections, I guess, if it's the name of a goddess. Makes sense. Oh, well, I switched whom Rose was bonded to, and then Lila very promptly died. The other one is, here, I'll grab it for you again, Kadru, with a K. Tower of Blood! Why did we not default to that sooner? Now I know how to play the game again. I can't help but feel almost like I'm cheating to be playing as Armatized Rose as opposed to Alisha with her more limited skill set in the DLC that is putatively all about her. But it does definitely make the game more manageable. Oh boy, here we go. We got the deep lore. Regarded as the daughter of Daksha and the consort of the sage Kashyapa in Hindu scriptures. Okay. That was something that was interesting to me about the like the background of that other name you called out when we were doing the Hexennial Grail, I feel like Zestiria draws from like a much wider range of world mythologies and religions than I realized or would have expected for a typical JRPG, but also especially for one that is otherwise so rooted in sort of Western traditions of history and mythology and religion, with the Christ narrative and King Arthur and the appeal to individualism in the ways that we were talking about at the end of the base game. Well, these fellas do seem more doable than the random encounters, at least, so that's something. What are their levels? 80. So they are actually slightly downscaled in their raw level versus the random encounters, which were rocking 85, I think. Looks like Alisha has inherited Rose's curse of always dying, Grail. There's always someone. Yeah, probably. And probably all the worse for not being able to leverage armatization in the way Rose was in the base game. This is tough. God! The fact that you can't heal when afflicted with a status ailment in Zestiria might be one of the most frustrating things to me about its combat system. Honestly. It just totally breaks my typical battle workflows. Yeah, Vritra is, which other game does that name come up in? Because I'm always interested, like, are they just reusing it for the sake of reusing it? Or is there kind of a deeper thematic connection or some interesting resonance that they're trying to elicit with it? So I feel like oftentimes they're more thoughtful than people give them credit for with things like the naming and the different world traditions that they're drawing from in these games. Ah, I got it. One of those which frustratingly has not made its official way to the west. I gotta figure out some way to play it. We've come this far, we're this committed to Tales of Praxis. Gotta find a way to get through all of them. That's okay, Grail. You've been watching for long enough to know that I half the time become afflicted with total aphasia or lack of ability to get words consistently out of my mouth. So maybe it's just contagious. Maybe I'm rubbing off on you. Oh no, get out while you can. Yeah, that's one of the most frustrating things about it to me. Like my knowledge of those games that haven't made it to the West is pretty much constrained to their Wikipedia page. And I think for basically all of them, it says, yeah, you know, these are regarded by fans as some of the most unusual and innovative and interesting entries in the series. And they also never made it to the West, which is like, I don't know if it's more about Bandai Namco's philosophy or the DNA of these games versus, you know, something like Final Fantasy just being more intrinsically westernized and accessible, so maybe they just don't feel like those games would be understood by enough of the West. But I also wonder, I mean, I definitely feel like just all of Japanese pop culture is definitely becoming more widely accepted and popularized in the West. Like, obviously it's had a huge audience for a long time, but just in terms of it kind of being more in vogue and part of the zeitgeist. So I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to do more to capitalize on that by either, you know, like doing more remastered versions of the games that had previous releases, or maybe even trying to localize some that hadn't been in the past. Be really cool, at least, let's put it that way. I would be deeply happy if that happened, as I know would so many other fans. No, Grail, anything but that. You never go full article writer. Once you go article writer, you never go back. Next thing you know, you'll be publishing books on Xenoblade, and I won't be able to help you. I mean, I'll be able to help you a lot with the articles, but not with your affliction. David, my man! Oh, that took me a minute to process that he was here.
Finally caught up to you all. So, what's the deal? I mean, both with you ladies and these ruins.
How about yourself? Did you find any clues as to how to seal this place back up?
You can put the prettiest of lids on a trash can. It's still gonna stink.
Let me guess. Your roundabout way of saying that calling the Hellions here is our first priority.
Anything but Xenoblade.
Keep working on the seal.
And you? What's got you ladies all antsy?
We think there might be someone focusing malevolence on this area.
Tropical Sephiroth.
They're after Sarai?
Actually, they may be aiming for us. I feel as though we've been observed our whole way here.
So, they're hellions who appreciate beauty after all. Now, what's gotten into you two?
Nothing. We're fine. Yes. We're going to stop this malevolence from reaching Sarai. That's all. Right now, that's all that matters. Looks like they'll need to come up with their answers themselves. If we could journey with them longer, we might be able to offer our perspectives, but there's a limit on what we can do.
Well, it's not like we're out of time, right?
Precisely. Thanks, David. We appreciate the concern.
Boy, they really are in a state.
That's interesting too. I don't think we talked about this explicitly last time, but there's an interesting sense that I think was what they were working to highlight in that scene just then. How this probably relates to the gender dynamics too, but these two female party members, Rose and Alisha, have been kind of in this DLC so far focalizing their whole journey together around Sarai and like going and journeying to Sarai and seeing what he's up to and what the Hellions are doing in relation to him, in the same way that kind of they were implicitly coded as support characters in the main game. I think that's an interesting way of showing like the Seraphim we're talking about, how they really in some sense still have to find, well, what Lila calls their answer, what you might call their own sense of self or what it is that they value. I wonder whether that will come up and be brought to bear on the question of why Rose became the shepherd too, because if she just felt obligated to fill in for Sarai after he left, like that's very thematically similar in terms of her just taking on the role of this person she'd been supporting throughout the main game, as opposed to positively deciding what it is that she wants to do.
Let's do some fortune telling. Please pick one.
So, which side is the front?
David, are you asking?
That's an interesting question about localization, Itchy. I know just enough about that whole, like, the business side of that world to know that it's a proper mess. But yeah, I would not be surprised if part of why it's harder to get releases in Europe is just because of the plurality of languages as opposed to just porting something to English. I'd never really thought about that before. I'm so sorry for you. That's got to be a tough lot to have. Okay, so there was a locked door way back there, which I'm assuming this is the key for. Well, I feel like if we're doing this DLC and taking the time to do it right, we ought to head back and use that special key we just got to see what all is hanging out back there. Yeah, because it has to be the same content in like a million different languages, right? I miss the days of manuals, dude. I loved going back to the old school packaging when I finally dusted off and opened up Destiny to play that a little while ago. The fun thing about that, because that was one that I got complete in box, and I smiled because this was before the time when I as a kid got into gaming, but I guess it actually included an insert for like basically a helpline that you could dial into. Have y'all ever heard of this? Where like if you were, because you know it's an old school JRPG, it doesn't hold your hand or tell you what to do next, and a lot of the puzzles are hard, so you can sort of be at a loss as to what to do next. And because it was in a time before the internet, when you know fans had guides or there were official guidebooks walking you through things, you could literally dial into this hotline and pay someone manning the phones from Namco and say like, hey, this is where I'm at in this game, can you tell me what to do next? Which I thought was just like the most charming little window into this historical era of gaming that I had never directly experienced, but kind of wish I'd gotten the chance to. I was telling that anecdote and I didn't even process what it was that we got. Oh, an hourglass? I guess that was worth it. Like she didn't understand why you would subject yourself to that, Grail. I get why that would be hard to understand. I also think like it can be so rewarding to, I mean, as you know, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but to engage with works of art and games and stories that, Jesus Christ, this is a complicated dungeon. I was not prepared for this. I figured this would be like a quick little outlet into Camlon. Now I'm starting to feel like maybe this is going to be the majority of the DLC. Playing a Tales game you don't like is not probably exactly the same thing as this, but I compare it a lot to like other more established works of art where it's clear that the whole point of what it's trying to achieve is that like the art is trying to give you a bad but artistically important experience. Like you don't watch Joker to be entertained and feel good, but it's also a really artistically interesting and rewarding movie. You don't like watch the play waiting for Godot to have a good time or be hanging on the edge of your seat about what's going to happen next in the plot, but it has really interesting things to say about the banality of the modern world and existentialism and all of that good stuff. And I think a lot of games that you might not enjoy as much as other games can be really rewarding and challenging in the same way. Like when they're frustrating, but frustrating in interesting ways that you can then interrogate and ask yourself, like, why is that? I remember I had to give that stump speech more than once back when Death Stranding came out, because that was one where actually I still have yet to get through it because it was so deeply tedious and boring to me, which, like I was just saying, I get that's the point of it. I get what Kojima was trying to say with the gameplay, but that doesn't make it more of a joy to sit down and manage the gameplay of delivering packages all over the world. Thank you for the quick save reminder. I had visions of getting absolutely bricked by an enemy and having to go back and do this whole thing again. Itchy, in that same spirit, I don't know if you've ever collected or seen any of this, but one of the favorite things that I always love to see when I go to speak at video game cons is, well, in general, all of the vendors there, because there are a million vendors who just clearly have a deeply personal love for video games and make really like unique and interesting and fun products as a result of that. But one that is oftentimes at these big conventions is a variety of merchants who will make like physical copies or collector's edition of like digital, oftentimes indie games that, you know, didn't have the budget to do a big physical release, but then got popular after the fact. Like actually, speaking of collector's editions that I've never opened, Fangamer did a really cool collector's edition like that for Hollow Knight. And that is another centerpiece of my collection that I really love, and I've never opened it because I just played the digital version of Hollow Knight. But then I saw that at a con, and I had to have it. I love that game. So we didn't stop and talk about this, but Zavid and the other Seraphim also signaled in that last skit conversation that Mick Leo is working on restoring the seal to Camlon, which signals to me we're gonna run into our dear friend Meebo to round out the clan by the time this is said and done.
What incredible skill! You wield that spear like an umbrella. It's beautiful, but it is an umbrella.
Yeah, for sure, Itchy. The nutty thing, which like I'm so sad that this is the direction that just game publication is going in. I think I mentioned this on the stream a little while ago, back when I first discovered it, but I don't know if either of you saw the like the news about the collector's edition that's being put out for Spider-Man 2, the big Sony release. But, you know, at first glance, it looks like your standard big fancy $200 collector's edition that has, you know, a statue and a steel case and everything. But then you look a little closer and you realize it doesn't call it a steelbook. They call it a like steelbook display piece. And then you ask, like, well, why is that? Why are you just calling it something for display? And that's because even the collector's edition, most expensive possible copy of the physical edition of this game no longer includes a physical disc at all. It just comes with a download code for the digital game, which, like, I know at this point I'm just being an old man shaking his fist at a cloud and being sad about sort of the onslaught of time and the progress of the medium, but it really saddens me that everything is going digital first. Especially when, I mean, I don't want to be like alarmist about it, but I really worry about being able to access digital only games in the long run. I just always feel safer about having the actual disc or cartridge and owning that and not having to pay any kind of subscription service for access to it, and just always being able to turn on my console, no matter how old it is, and fire it up and dive into that story and fall back in love with it, like we did with my Wii and Dawn of the New World, and like you'd always be able to do with a book. But man, gaming is just going so differently in a direction that I really personally do not favor. Yeah, I'm totally with you, Itchy. Well, always glad to meet a like-minded gamer who speaks my language about this stuff. I think as much as anything, that's been a big thing that's like helped the resurgence of the retro market, is because like nowadays with everything being just, oh, stream this or rent access to this game or download this, like I think a lot of people do miss the just the physical lived experience of owning a game and having like a physical library, the way again you would have a library of books that have meant a lot to you. And I think that's all the more incentive to explore those older games, not just as a really interesting artifact of gaming history and as a lot of really, you know, unusual and rewarding game stories that have, you know, never again come back to the medium, but also, you know, exploring and enjoying a time when games were only a physical object and so much care was put into that. I feel like I should be able to get through there, but it looks like that's just not true. I'm not doing a dangerous encounter with fairies, if there's one thing I learned from the base game. Oh, Itchy, I haven't even heard of Evercade, so especially if you support them so much, tell me what is Evercade? What's that all about? I'm always down to learn about and support any and all projects that are kind of working in this particular space of game preservation and physical copies. Grail, I'm sorry I missed your comment about the Zilia cross-dressing cosplay. That's wild. I feel like I hope eventually the series will get a little more popular, because I'm stunned. I've been going to cons for probably the better part of a decade, I guess now, and I basically never see any Tales cosplays, which is so sad for me, because I always keep an eye out for them. I love the series so much, but always lots of Final Fantasy, lots of like Dark Souls, Elden Ring, even sometimes some Xenoblade stuff, but poor Tales is left out in the cold usually. Oh my goodness, Grail. Don't die in real life for all the brutality of your challenge run. Better you than me, my friend. Oh, Itchy, I don't know what Blaze is either. I feel so out of the loop. This is not the right element to be using. We want Lila. Like the hitboxes of your party's attacks or the enemy's attacks. Or, best of all, both. Well, I was kind of interested in the story of the DLC probing the whole girl group vibe that we were talking about in the last stream, but I guess it is consistent with Zavid's character that the minute there's a girl group, he would find a way to penetrate it. No double entendre intended.
Well, guess I overdid it again.
Or like wasted your energy and talked too much.
Oh, that's such a cool project, Itchy. Yeah, I've seen companies doing similar things at cons. I just love that.
That was a difficult
And you know, as long as there are like vibrant communities of companies and people who are insisting on those physical releases, especially of games that never got them, and do it in a cool and artistic and collectible way, I think even if the bigger name companies skew towards digital first, we'll be okay. We'll be able to still find the physical copies of the stuff that we want. Yeah, no, I'll look it up after this, Itchy. Thanks for shouting it out. Always appreciate a good rec. Yeah, I feel like squirrels knowing how to get you is a consistent JRPG-ism, Grail. Don't know where that comes from. Maybe the squirrels in Japan are particularly aggro or powerful, but I feel like that's a trope for whatever reason. Grail, your comment about ignoring Zavid reminds me of one of my favorite lines. This is not true. It's not one of my favorite lines from Symphonia, but it's a line that made me laugh, and it's a line that when my buddy Dan played through it for the first time recently, like, he lost his shit at it, and he's kept quoting it to me, so it's in my head. But when Zelos, like, very early on, when the whole party finally gets together, is, you know, being Zelos, and Presea, like, doesn't know what to do with it. Regal has this line, I think in a skit to Presea, where he says, "Presea, not all questions require a response. In this case, it is fine to ignore Zelos." In this case, it is fine to ignore Zavid. Yeah, that sounds dope, Itchy. I'll definitely check it out after this. Thank you. Okay, I think we are finally making progress to the side of the map that we need to be on. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, since the base game of Zestiria was so mazy, that they would double down on that for the DLC. But they really buried the lead with it. Based on the first few areas, I was expecting it to be much more focused on the story and just conversation and relationships between characters, rather than hardcore dungeon crawling and Zestiria's sense of hardcore, which is relative, of course.
I am ready.
Grail, I think I don't even get your joke, because I think I've given up on trying to understand Gen Z. Like, is the joke that they're supposed to have really long attention spans, or just vanishingly short attention spans? I think I gave up on relating to them when I realized they were all living on TikTok. TikTok is kind of the frontier upon which I gave up on social media. Yes, thank you. Now I understand. Itchy, to be fair, I think half of the reason that I've consciously stayed away from TikTok is because I know all too well, like, how much absurd money they have spent on engineering it to be just impossibly addictive. So I fully believe that if I did give it a try, I would spend way too much of my time living in there on a daily basis, and Aaron simply does not have time for that. Okay, Grail, good. So there's hope for some of you folks, at least. That gives me something to believe in. So I'll take it. Well, Itchy, look, in their defense, they have to default to the lowest common denominator. So, of course, if they're going to come out swinging with anything, it's going to be half-naked women. And then they optimize from there. I feel like this stream is maybe not the worst example of, like, you know, not long or short, but just bouncy attention spans, I guess. Like, part of what I think is fun about the kinds of conversations and gaming that we're able to do here on Tales of Praxis is, on the one hand, of course, it's a very close reading and consideration of, you know, very long games that require significant attention spans. But then also we have the freedom to bounce around and talk about a whole range of related games, whether those are Tales games or other JRPGs or storytelling in games like even Halo that naturally come up along the way. And I don't consider that a distraction. I think that just adds more texture to the experience. Bouncy attention spans. I think that's a good thing for which to aim. Oh, Grail. That means way more to me than I expected it to. Thank you. I did not start the stream with the goal of helping to cultivate longer attention spans, but if there's anything I'm able to accomplish with it, I feel like that's a net positive. So, cheers to that. I feel like, if nothing else, having this, you know, marathon adventure of JRPG gaming and research that I've done for the last, like, going on a year, I guess, between Xenoblade and Final Fantasy VII and now the Tales series, has really helped my attention span, too. I mean, you're simply not going to be able to keep up with what is going on with these games and appreciate what they're trying to say if you don't have a long attention span. Like, there's just too much. You might be able to mechanically get through them, but my guess is that one of the main reasons that a lot of people end up feeling lost in JRPGs isn't because, like, the JRPG is incomplete or forgets to include something or whatever, but it's just because there's so much information and all of it comes together to tell a single story. And if you're not keeping track of it all, or if you're, you know, only playing bits and pieces of the story over an extended period of time, it's going to be an impossible task to hold it all in your mind. Yeah, I feel you about the vapidness, but you know, it's kind of like what we were saying about the value of those companies that prioritize physical releases in today's game market, right? As long as you kind of keep a lookout for and find the gamers and thinkers and publications that are doing it a little differently, I think that's where a lot of the value comes from. This is interesting that these doors that needed to be opened by Elemental Seal in the base game have kind of a similar lock mechanism on them now, but you're not using an element to open them. You just have to interact with them. I wonder if there's any kind of narrative explanation for that. I don't really see one as of yet. Yeah, I forget whether you were on the stream the other day, Grail, but I tweeted about this and then went on a little mini rant about... Yeah, you were, because we were talking about Kotaku for a little bit, and just speaking of vapid, that level of games journalism. For your point of reference, Itchy, since you're just getting to know us, a big part of what we try to do with our written content and just overall philosophy on With a Terrible Fate is, being passionate gamers who love these stories, but use like the rigorous kind of analysis you would get in like academic philosophy or other academic disciplines to try to unpack like what makes these stories special and why are they really this valuable, because we think that's just the best way to kind of develop a richer language around how we feel about these games and being able to put a name to our experiences with them and share those experiences with others. And a big part of what we're kind of tacitly resisting and fighting back against is, to use Grail's word, the more vapid kind of lowest common denominator, speaking of lowest common denominators, of commentary about games in the media, where so many of the biggest sites are truly, I think, just in it for clickbait and being more interested in throwing out an aggressive opinion that is going to start fights and get more eyeballs on their stuff than saying anything that is accurate, let alone in depth, let alone illuminating and worthwhile. And when you think about the amount of care and thought and attention and manpower and artistry that is put into any one of these games, it just strikes me as wildly, not just disappointing, but kind of irresponsible to take a work of art like a game and treat it that way in your commentary on it. So we really try to do something a little different around here. Yeah, I get that Alisha doesn't have elemental powers, Grail, but then my question is like, what is the explanation for how the seal is getting opened if it's similar to an elemental seal? Because it has a different color than all the elements too. Have you noticed? It's like a purplish pink. It's almost like if it were a different Tales game, I would think, oh, maybe it's reacting to her royal blood or something, and these ruins are tied up with like the royal lineage of Highland, but I don't really see that supported by an explanation in the world. I'm just trying to see whether there's some kind of explanation for it. I'm going to catch up on messages real quick. It's just so nice to have enough messages in the chat to actually feel like I have a bit to juggle here. Not that I don't love our one-on-one conversations, Grail. Those are also a lot of fun, as you know. Itchy, I'm embarrassed to say the Mass Effect games are actually one of my gaming gaps. Obviously, I know about them because I'm in the space, but I still have yet to play them. But given all we've been saying about JRPGs and attention spans, I would be willing to buy that theory at face value. That strikes me as deeply insightful in terms of a lot of people who play that sort of stuff. Yeah, of course, royalty doesn't need rules. No, Itchy, you are a welcome addition. It is wonderful to have more of a roundtable conversation. I mean, I think the way I was kind of envisioning these streams back when I first started them was as kind of like almost a seminar style, course or reading group where we could have, a range of views and conversation points. So I'm truly grateful that you're contributing to that. So thank you. And yes, to go back to your thought about people think a game is bad because they don't enjoy it or they don't have facility with it, I am totally with you. That is one of my major pet peeves as well. It's similar to what we were saying about like the whole conversation of why would you play a game that you don't like or a game that frustrates you? Or I went through something kind of similar back during my last relationship when my ex like truly did not understand what I got out of Miyazaki's games, because like I am not good at Miyazaki's games. I've played the hell out of them. I've platinumed them. I have many thoughts about them, but in terms of technical prowess with their combat, I will routinely start like my actual lectures about his work saying, I am bad at these games, I want you to know. And so when Sekiro came out, like I played through that 4 times in a row or something ridiculous to get the platinum. And I would be like, dying to the same boss over and over again and screaming at the TV. And she would be like, why are you doing this to yourself? It's like, it's stressful for me. It doesn't seem like you're having a good time. Like, what value are you getting out of this? And I would try to explain, like, no. Part of the magic of these games is like, it's exactly in experiencing and overcoming this frustration, because that's what this story is all about. But I think so many people, do equate like having a pleasant experience with a game because they see it as like entertainment and something that they want to win, with it being like a quality piece of art. And I think game designers and interactive storytellers, they can tell so many kinds of stories about your experience with the game. And sometimes a lot of the most interesting stories can be about experiences that are not all that pleasurable. So I think, taking the time to think that through and come up with a language and explanation around it, I think is really important, and something that we're still working towards, and I would say is one of the priorities of the publication and the stuff we think about, but is definitely something that a lot of people are still wrapping their heads around. Speaking of wrapping their heads around, I'm like, where the hell are we supposed to go next? Well, Grail, I appreciate where you're coming from with Elden Ring. All I can say is, for whatever my opinion is worth to you, I would strongly recommend that you play through it at some point, because I think a lot of people don't really get to the meat of the story just because the world is so huge and it seems to be so focused on exploration. But I actually found it to be one of the kind of more interesting and rewarding and empowering of Miyazaki's stories, and I was really touched by the way it was told. So I think it is worth getting through at some point, but I totally get your issues with it. Okay, so this is not the right way. I'm gonna have to go back and try not to get any more lost. Yeah, that is an interesting thing to say, Itchy, given that you're a fan of JRPGs. But that's one of the magical things about JRPGs, right? Like, they have distinctive elements to their gameplay and the storytelling and everything, but I feel like they do span like more sub-genres in terms of how they balance, like, sometimes sci-fi, sometimes fantasy, sometimes stuff more realistic than a lot of people give them credit for. So I get that. Wow, Itchy, very high praise for Mass Effect. I've definitely heard that from other people whom I respect too. It's forever on my list, and I feel terrible saying that because I know it's such a running joke at this point, but man, it's funny, once you dedicate your time to working through the entirety of a long-running and beloved JRPG series, each entry in which is 40 to 60 hours, somehow all of your timing for extra gaming suddenly gets pushed to the back burner and goes out the window a little bit. Grail, I am completely confident that is the first time anyone has ever said that combination of words about Tales of Berseria. Okay, so your quote that you're going to hold over my head forever is Tales of Graces is the same thing as Ocarina of Time, and I'm going to hold the quote over your head that Berseria is the Dark Souls of the JRPG genre. Now we're even. Mutually assured destruction. I think we finally found the right way to go. My god. Navigating a puzzle box like this while also balancing a delightfully lively chat. I am really being put through my paces this stream, and I love it. Yeah, Itchy, so I'm curious, have you cracked any of Final Fantasy 16 yet? Because I feel like that, part of what strikes me that people are finding unusual about that, kind of interestingly, based on the fact that it's a JRPG, is that it is like kind of a much more traditional fantasy focused JRPG than a lot of the JRPGs we've gotten in recent years. And I think people are kind of didn't realize how out of that aesthetic most JRPGs have become. Alright, we have another pair of Hellions coming up. Interesting boss formats in this dungeon. You know, I had a funny moment. I was about to say the way this dungeon is such a labyrinth with multiple bosses and the high enemy levels, it almost feels like an EX dungeon, but I guess I shouldn't be surprised because this is also like bonus add-on content at the end of a main game. So I guess in a sense, it's almost like a DLC that is itself an EX dungeon. It's an interesting way to think of it. I wouldn't have expected that going into this. Grail, you have a knack for putting auto mod through its paces, my friend. Should figure out how to just turn all that off. All right. Let's see what we're dealing with this time. Rock. There's a classic name for a classic enemy type. And Valkyrie. All right. We're into classics as opposed to more esoteric religion and mythology. With almost identical hit points. But this one's weak to fire, and we are going to be paired with Lila once we fix our setup. So we shall start with the Valkyrie. Da 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 da. Ooh, I think that's the first time we've gotten an over 2x power hit in maybe the whole game. Oh my god, we nuked that Valkyrie. I think primarily just with that Mystic Art. Wow! Talk about night and day in comparison with some of the other battles we've been slogging through here. I'll take it. Amazing. I know, Grail. Look, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it myself. You really do feel like a Jesus substitute.
Incredible knife handling. Do you have anything? I'm not hiding anything, I swear.
I was surprised and blown away for half a second at the 36 points of grade, but then I remembered we're back on Zestiria's special grade scale as opposed to the typical numbers of grade you see in other games. For Brenner! It's a cool name for a spear. I guess that's associated with the Valkyries. Sounds like that kind of name. From Wagner's Ring Cycle.
Things are so good, especially after a battle.
I'm going to take a second to read your message and give it its due, Itchy, before we move on here. Yeah, that's really interesting, Itchy. And honestly, I feel you. I actually, Like, I've become more of a Final Fantasy junkie over the years, but 13 was actually my first Final Fantasy also, which I think is a really interesting generation of Final Fantasy fan, because I think even among those who found their way into the series through Final Fantasy 13, it's not by any means one of the more beloved games. But it does have kind of a weirdly special place in my heart, because even though I don't have a lot of love for the 13 trilogy, I do have a lot of thoughts on it, just not a lot of love for it. But I do have a lot of appreciation for it just because it was my way into those games. 6 is actually still on my list too, but for what it's worth, you are definitely not the first person I've heard saying that 6 is, I don't want to say a sleeper hit, because I mean tons of people know and love 6, but in terms of like the popular reputation of the games, you hear so many people talk about 7 and 10, and 6 kind of is not as widely appreciated as a blockbuster hit as those are. And the people who play it just absolutely love it. And the people who know me, who have played it, say it's exactly the kind of game that I would have a lot to say about. So it is definitely on my list. I bought and downloaded the beautiful collection of the pixel remasters that Squeenix just put out for them. So I'm excited to play through it in conjunction with the rest of those at some point when I have a free however many hours. One of my favorites too, and this is one that I got a lot of joy in thinking and writing about and studying back when I first played it, which I think is also, like, relatively speaking, a sleeper hit, but also beloved by the fans who know it, is Final Fantasy IX. It says a lot of really interesting, thoughtful things. It's very much like a classic magic story that captures a lot of just the pure magic that JRPGs are known for, I would say, and a lot of other people would say. And I think also, like, the direction in which Final Fantasy is going now with 16 and potentially beyond, and also just the kinds of topics that a lot of JRPGs are starting to think about, are all very clearly present in and kind of, I would say, prefigured by Final Fantasy IX. So that's amazingly almost 25 years old at this point already. But if you play it now, I would venture that it feels very modern, not in terms of the graphics or anything like that, but in terms of its, like, the literary quality to its storytelling, the theatrical quality, and a lot of the questions that it poses in the sorts of enemies and battles that it presents. No, I have mad respect for you, Itchy. Actually, it's so funny that you say that, because I started a playthrough of it on my SNES Classic. So I love that little box. I think it's one of the coolest things Nintendo has ever done. But then I moved on to something else before I got all the way through, and that was probably like a year ago at this point. So I'm figuring I'm just gonna pick it back up fresh at some point on the Pixel remaster. But I love the SNES Classic for old school gaming. I have it set up on my bedside table because I have a TV set up in my room, so that in the same way some people like to read before bed, I can do that with a little bit of retro style gaming before bed. It's a little, probably unsurprising window into how I live my life off stream. Spoiler alert, it's pretty fucking similar to on stream. Except I keep most of I was going to say I keep most of my thoughts to myself, but I will have similar thoughts about, like, oh, I wonder, what you could say about this, or what explains this aspect of the story, or what's the best theory to kind of accommodate all of the data of the way this character engages in the world. I'm just talking at my dog as opposed to people on stream or other theorists. And she will usually not have as much to say, but she will always be happy to give me plenty of judgmental looks. Because she is the classic image of a disapproving corgi. Yeah, right on. That's a long list, but you've got a lot of good times ahead of you. There's no doubt about that. We did a whole series of analytical articles for the site on Final Fantasy VII Remake also. Definitely controversial, but I am in the camp that I think it did a lot of really cool and radical and rewarding things in terms of the storytelling risks that it took. That shed a lot of cool insight into what it is to like tell an interactive story. So I would highly recommend that as well. And if you haven't played 16 yet, I would definitely put that on your list. Huge fan of that. I picked it up on release day, and I truly could not put it down for a week. Like I played it all the way through and did basically nothing else. In large part, I think, for all the reasons I was just talking about, where I feel it is deeply in dialogue with a lot of the things that were most interesting to me about 9.
Just don't stop coming.
Itchy, I have not played Lost Odyssey, but I've heard great things about that, so that's on my list. I feel like there's a whole like era of older school JRPGs that I never got to that I really want to make a point of just playing one right after the other because people always tell me about them. Lost Odyssey is one of my like closest friend and colleagues on With a Terrible Fate, Dan Hughes's like favorite games of that generation. So he's told me a lot about it. And I think also like a similar flavor, similar time frame, Eternal Sonata is one that has come up over and over again in conversations with people on stream and just other gamers. So yeah, I feel like there are a few there that I need to just play catch up on at some point. Oh, you two read to each other, Itchy? That's great. I love that. I get the same thing when I'm in relationships out of like gaming, even when it's a single player game. That's the kind of couch co-op I can get behind. When you find yourself a partner who just wants to sit and game and really dig into the story with you. That's what makes it special, in my opinion. Everything else is just icing on the cake. Grail, I mean, my apartment's not that big, so in a cosmic sort of way, I'm always sort of near a green screen, whether I like to be or not. The best I can do is shove it in a closet, but it's not that big of a closet and not that big of a space, so it's never too far away. Oh yeah, 100% Itchy. I mean, I think people who say that are just sort of being similarly superficial to the gamers that we were talking about before, who like infer from their not liking a game that the game is bad. Because yeah, 100%. Like one of the reasons that I have kept my Xbox 360 alive and kicking and in good condition over the years is because, as you're saying, like I think there's this whole magic era of like teams and studios that were kind of doing pretty out there and interesting, just one-offs on the Xbox 360. I mean, I guess even Vesperia was kind of like that before it was, redone for the PS3, right? It was a 360 exclusive initially, if I remember correctly. So yeah, I think there are many hidden gems to be discovered along the way there. Ooh, what game, Grail? Shout it out. I'll have to take a look. Yeah, I've veered so hard into just really only using PlayStation Kit and my speak of the devil, and it will think I'm talking to it. The PlayStation's voice controls, PlayStation Kit and Nintendo Switch. But yeah, I mean, I do like. We just start talking about the 360 and like I can hear all the sound effects of the system, the magic of unlocking achievements. I think there was just a special magic to the specific 360 era that like was not replicated by the Xbox One, not even close, and also was not quite there in the Xbox before the 360. They caught lightning in a bottle with that system in a lot of ways, I think. I have never ever heard of that, Grail, but that's why I love having you around, my friend. You introduce me to at least one new game every single stream, I think. Oh, it's a fighting game. Well, okay. It's more outside of the intersection of our interests than I expected. That's why. But I don't know. I mean, keep hanging out. You might very well talk me into being a fan of fighting games if we give it time.
Yeah. And still no sign of whoever's attracting all the malevolence either. Sure enough, maybe they're still observing us. Are you all right, Rose? Huh?
Grace, I don't want to stop this skit right after I started it, but just because you said that, Itchy, I feel like we're very much on the same wavelength with a lot of points in our gaming history. Because actually, the Tales of Graces was exactly for me also the reason that I got a PS3, and I think really all I even used the PS3 for was Graces and my attempts at getting through Zillia and the Silent Hill HD collection. I think that was it. Very small library, but very worth it. Let me tell you. I feel like fighting games, Grail, and I mean, you can tell me this, but I feel like they're the sort of genre where once you put in your hours and really get into it, you just have like an unfair, impossible advantage over any casuals. So I definitely believe for all you've said about your history in the genre that, especially in a beta, you're going to show people who's boss.
It'll be okay. Everyone's here for you.
It'd be a lot more convincing if you didn't look so freaked out yourself.
Oh, sorry. You know, there's something Nicklier said when I first joined up with Saray. What? Where'd this come from? That a true comrade is someone who sees and hears the same things as you. Different sight, but the same.
That was a good line. I remember that.
Comrade. I never thought of you as a comrade of mine. Not this again. I mean, you're a princess, a knight, political whatever, and a proper girl. You're like everything I'm not. You both see seraphim, hellions, malevolence, and the hearts of those they affect. The same things the shepherd and any of his squires see. And out come the royal speeches again. Ugh, Rose, why are you always so cruel to me?
I don't know. I just get like this when you're around, I guess.
But do you know what? These things happen. I'm used to it now. After all, we're friends.
What? When did we become friends?
I'm not sure. Maybe when we said terrible things to each other, had a knockdown, drag-out brawl, and then set out on a journey. Friendship is?
Oh, I kind of love that sentiment.
Got me there.
You're worried too, aren't you? There's so much malevolence accumulated here.
That's one problem, yeah.
There's another.
You. You gotta come up with your answer.
You're right. I need to find my answer somehow.
Ladies in anguish. So picturesque.
We're done giving hints, right?
Yes, this is a matter they need to resolve for themselves.
I love that fact that we're going back to the idea of different sights, same vision, or whatever that line of McLeo's was as well. Since we spent that time on the last stream talking about just the way in which Zestiria and this DLC, and then even Berseria after it, play with like visual representation in terms of what things look like and how that varies based on the perspective you're seeing it from. Like some characters can literally see malevolence and hellions, some can't perceive seraphim at all, and a lot of people are somewhere in between. And so the idea that kind of as we switch our perspectives around throughout the game, we're able to get a little bit of all of those different sights, but also that the game is unifying all of those sights and that narrative for us through this singular vision that we're helping to bring about, I think is a nice way of marrying that, like the mode of access we have to this world with the themes that its story is talking about. Cool too, because like I love the way they in that skit kind of turn on its head the idea that we were talking about before, where these two girls had really only sort of been aligned and defining their roles in the world through Saray, this other character, the hero, and now even in his absence, they're working towards and acting in relation to him. But then when they think about the idea of, oh, we have the same vision even though we have different perspectives on things, it's almost a way of changing the meaning of what Saray is for them, whereas previously he was something for them to follow and something that defined their roles. Now he's kind of the common ground where they can say, yeah, we're different, but Saray is almost more of a metaphor or a symbol for the vision that allows us to relate to each other. The fact that we can both see Hellions and malevolence and want to act for the goodness of the world in the way that only the shepherd and those who are affiliated with him can. I think that's a really empowering way of kind of changing the meaning of that. I'll catch up on messages real quick before we roll on here. My only funny Xbox One story, and it is a pretty funny story, I haven't gotten to tell it in a while, is I had no intention of getting an Xbox One because there was nothing really I wanted on it. I was happy to use my Xbox 360 for stuff and then just stay with my PS4 for other stuff. And then in undergrad, actually, my same roommate I was talking about before, Alex, he was involved with this like special interest group that ran events on campus. And in order to try to bring people to one event, they were like raffling things off one night. And so Alex wanted to help get people in attendance. So he was like, hey, you should come to this. And so I showed up. It was like the one event I went to all year. I showed up in like a tank top and sweatpants because it was, late at night and I was just busy studying and probably gaming. And I entered the lottery and ended up like totally as just a cosmic joke winning an Xbox One in this lottery, which I never would have bought for myself otherwise. So I do own an Xbox One, but only by pure happenstance. And that's the only and funniest story that I have about the Xbox One. But it was good to play something on. I think I played Shadow of Mordor on it back when that came out, and that was fine. I do like the idea of digging it out of my closet at some point for Halo, and I'm jonesing for that, although it's been years and I haven't done that. But yeah, that was a good gaming story. Yeah, Saray has kind of ascended to icon status. Something I talked about a little bit in way back in the Tales of Symphonia stream was the idea of how when you're in the the final approach to Mythos and Vinheim and you're going through the motions in Welgaia of saving all of the party members whom Mythos has trapped in like these illusions of various kinds, after you free the characters, there are these artifacts that are left over from the illusions that you can then use to fight the 3 optional bosses that lead up to and make sense of Mythos' final form. But then after you fight those bosses and they leave those artifacts of like shattered glass for the one that has Genus and Rain, and then a couple of other ones that I'm blanking on. I think one's a bug and one is something else. You guys can probably tell me. But Lloyd has really interesting conversations with the characters where he says like, oh, this is like an interesting object. Why don't we think of this as like a symbol of what you just overcame in this trial? And we can relate it to that and sort of have it as a badge of honor that you were able to actually overcome that. And I don't know why it struck me in such a poignant way this time playing through the remastered version, but I think there is something kind of special to the JRPG storytelling of the Tales series, where oftentimes characters will like decide to make a symbol out of something in their lives in a way that then adds another level of like literary content and nuance to their story and the way that we think about their story. All of which to say, like, ever since playing through that again, I've been picking up on that kind of like chosen in-world symbolism in a range of the games. And I think, you talk about Saray as an icon grail. I think this is a great example of that, where especially in his absence, now that he's not like a flesh and blood person to be traveling with, in kind of the same way that Jesus became an icon and symbol, right? Staying with that Christ narrative, Rose and Alisha are also able to turn him into an icon or symbol that they can interpret as a way of empowering their relationship rather than just some literal leader for them to follow. A cooking pot or a map of all the ruins in the world, right, Itchy? Depending on whether you want to symbolize her strengths or weaknesses. I forget whether and when I saved last, so I'm just going to obsessively clock one more save before we go on here. My goodness. As Journey would no doubt say about this dungeon, it goes on and on and on and on. I just recently finished watching The Sopranos for the first time ever, so I'm sure that's why that particular song is stuck as an earworm in my mind. We have to hold on to that feeling, Itchy. We have to. Grail, did you predict this? I forgot that. Well, good for you, but also, I wish it could have been otherwise. A little bit. I probably wouldn't be wishing it could be otherwise, except that I literally spent this morning, before I had to drag my bones off to my day job, working through the second half of one of Vesperia's EX dungeons. So, like, the theme of my gaming today has been EX dungeon grinds. Which, I mean, I guess that's a mood. At some point, one just has to lean into it, right? Yeah, I mean, I think it's a safe assumption at this point, Grail. I really, really liked the narrative content of the one that I did today, which was the mausoleum under Zaude, the necropolis of nostalgia. That's what it's called in the game, because I thought it added such a cool and interesting layer of meaning and connection, like we were talking about at the top of the stream, and something that I wished I had my first time playing through the game. But yes, the actual act of figuring out how to navigate it was, as you say, hellish. So two things can be true. I enjoyed it, and yet. Itchy, thank you so much for joining, my friend. It's been great having you. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and feel like you got a little taste of what With a Terrible Fate is about. We do this with the same timing every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So if you did enjoy it, I hope you subscribed. Hope you let other gamers know who are interested in the same kind of, different breed of conversation about video games and their stories. And I hope to see you back here. It was really fun having your voice in the mix, my friend. And game well in the meantime, all right? Where the hell is the next way to go here? Well, you just made my evening saying that, Itchy. I will look forward to chatting with you again in the future, then. Cheers to that. Alright, they're up to level 90. Try not to freak out too much. We want Zavid. Oh my goodness. Yep, back to 2, Grail. Mirroring the party reduction mechanics of this DLC versus vanilla Zestiria. And we're right back to claustrophobic camera angles and all of the usual madness. Hey, but I don't mind that, because the beauty is then you came back and it was as if no time had passed. That's how you know it's the good kind of streaming collab, when you can come and go as you please and never miss a beat. So, truly, how are we supposed to manage a fight from this angle? Maybe we can just open things up a little more. Literally, are you seeing this? Like, half of the battlefield is on the other side of the wall. Like, we only have access to a semicircle of combat right now. It wouldn't be a Zestiria DLC otherwise. Oh my god, and we have status effects, so we can't even heal properly. Rose is going down again. Probably. Maybe not. I love the music, but that's about all of this that I love. Alright, we got one at least. Jesus Christ. No! I'm just not doing it twice in a row. That felt as though it took all we had. I'm just... You... Not even if you paid me. Alright, let's heal and reset here. Dios mio. I am a little stressed out though, because I feel like we just walked around and looked at every single place that seemed as though it would be passage to the next area, and I didn't see any passage. Oh, because it was hiding behind the chest. I'm trying to diagnose how I'm feeling. Like, I don't mind EX dungeons and challenge content. I just feel like I was really enjoying and leaning into the experience of digging into this next chapter of the story, and I feel like that made me unprepared for then, like, you know, focusing on having all of the technical precision to actually get through and manage my party for really routinely intense enemy encounters. And I just feel like that's becoming a little bit of a roadblock for keeping me engaged with the way that the DLC is actually elaborating the world and these characters. Put differently, I think the DLC would be streamlined a little more for my particular flavor of gaming experience if the dungeon were a little bit more direct and we weren't, you know, fighting level 90, probably going on 95 enemies, even though we've only spent like 4 or 5 hours in the game so far. Yeah, you're right. I'm giving them too much of the benefit of the doubt, girl. What do you see as them taking from fighting games? I'm curious, because I have played vanishingly few fighting games, even casually, over the course of my life. I guess Smash Bros. Sometimes, but I don't even know if a serious fighting game person like you would say that qualifies. I'm gonna opt out of this one as well. Where are we going next? Can we just get away with opening this door? Oh, thank goodness. I was afraid it was going to be locked. Oh no, Grail, what happened? What was that? Oh no. Don't leave me hanging. My god. It's exactly like the necropolis that I was navigating this morning. That had like 11 floors, I think, and now we were on the 10th floor of these ruins. Alright, well. It's where we are now. We're doing it. Doing the thing. I didn't realize my my water bottle was in the shot. It's embarrassing. Oh my god, now the dragoons glow. Maybe they were always glowing and I just didn't clock that. Either way, I would like no part in that. Please and thank you. You know the thing that I found nice about the Vesperia EX dungeon that I did this morning, though, Grail, was that for as nuts as it was to navigate and figure out where it was that I had to actually go next in order to get through the whole thing, all the enemies, from the random encounters to the bosses, capped out at like level 65. Maybe 70. Certainly not 150. So it definitely left me feeling like maybe there was a bit of power creep or difficulty creep between the development of that and the development of Zestiria. I thought I made a point of going in the right direction. Nope. I tried, and I failed. Maybe it's just that the doors blend in, so when I'm thinking about it on the fly and managing everything else I have to manage for the stream, it's easy to overlook them. That's the excuse I'm going to give myself, at least. I think either this is the top floor, or there are between 10 and 20 more floors, and this is the entirety of the remaining DLC. But I don't think there's any middle ground at this point. That's what I'm saying, though. They get tanky, and they have resistance to a lot of elements, but they don't get like impossibly leveled. At least, I mean, I was playing on the normal difficulty also, so maybe on higher level difficulties they also increase enemy level, although I feel like to my recollection that's not usually how it works, but truly like the highest level enemies I saw were like level 65 or 70. And most of what I found myself complaining about was, oh, these are absolute turtles who I can't get damage through. It was never like, oh, my party is in danger of being wiped out, and I have to figure out how to manage that. And that's not that much of a problem in Vesperia, remember, because, you know, they literally had an enemy in there with, like, 9999 as its defensive stat. So you could do like literally just 1 damage to it, but that's just because they want you to use the fatal strikes to take them down. Which, you know, once you get a handle on that, which you certainly will by the time you get to the X dungeon, that's not impossible. Certainly not as hard, I would say, as fighting like level 120 or 130 enemies in Zestiria. Yeah, it's really been interesting for me to think about those level up items that you're talking about, Grail, because like on the one hand I'm grateful to have them, but also I kind of feel
I just remembered something.
like using them feels like cheating to me. It's weird. So I like, as much as I've had them in my back pocket for the entire game, I never actually used them to increase my party's level because it's just like something about, I don't know, the idea of them progressing and getting stronger through battle versus just by brute force from these extra items that came with the game. It just felt more authentic to keep it based on the experience in battle. I will say, because, you know, we've been talking a lot about trophies, and so you know how I feel about all of that, and my sometimes unhealthy obsession with it. The one way that I have been taking advantage of the level up items is for some of the harder to execute secret missions on the bosses and the trophies associated with them, just because I wanted to see if I could get all of the trophies for them. I wasn't as interested in getting the title that comes from doing all of the secret missions in a single run of the game. So what I would do was, if I was having trouble with a secret mission as I was going through my playthrough, I would just I would save, and then I would level up the party to level 80 or 90 or whatever ridiculous with all the items, and that would make it much easier to get the secret mission done. And then I would just load up the save to before the point when I used those items and run the boss fight again, so that it didn't mean I had to play through the whole rest of the game at a really over-leveled position. Yeah, try. I'll be interested to... I'll bet we can feel out a good explanation about what makes them similar between the two of us. Give me some data. This was a mistake. This was a huge mistake. We should have just gone to the next area.
Gotcha, Gold.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. Yeah, I couldn't remember whether there was a combo counter in the Port of Fantasia that they did for GBA. I felt like there was because it was familiar to me, but it was cool to find it as an item and something like bonus to add to the combat system and the way they present it in Tales of Destiny. I felt like that was a neat way to make it feel special, whereas we just take the normalcy of combos as a requirement for granted nowadays in the series. So that definitely strikes me as similar. It's almost similar to some card games in that way too, right? Like Magic the Gathering or Yu-Gi-Oh! Like a big part of the meta of those games now is getting off complicated combos with a bunch of cards.
Something's wrong. Huh? Why haven't we seen it yet? What's wrong, Rose? We're all the way through, but there's no sign of the Hellion bringing the malevolence. Has it gotten into Camlon already? Rose, calm yourself!
Yeah, don't you notice anything about this malevolence?
Look up!
Ah!
Big suckers we run
There's
into.
some ugly mugs on these fellas.
What?
I was right, they do like a pretty face. She's aiming for the biggest dandy of them all.
After her!
I think you're right, Grail. I think that's exactly what it is.
Rose!
Yep. Talk about an iconic demon. There's only one thing in any world that looks like that. Baphomet, my love. I missed your last message about fighting, so I'll just... Speaking of fighting, before we fight, I'll catch up on that. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I feel like, actually, and you can tell me whether this is in Berseria too, I don't remember, but I feel like in that sense that you just talked about, it's almost more applicable to Zestiria than some of the other games because they incentivize and reward managing like the activity points or whatever that bottom blue bar is called that they use instead of TP. And like they make it easy to gain it back when you time the dodges to avoid enemy attacks. So it seems even more like skill-based comboing and combo avoidance than you get in some of the other titles. That's interesting. So maybe I have more experience with fighting games than we thought. I just didn't realize it. That's like the way I kicked off my study on Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Plato back when I published that. I said like, you didn't realize it, but this game tricked you into studying Plato for 60 to 100 hours. Arguably more. I think I clocked in well over 200 my last time replaying that last year. Okay, let's buckle up and do this. Level 100. Rough. Well, hopefully we get through it. Only one way to find out. Okay, this dialogue has me hopeful that we're not actually going to have to get all the way through this fight. But I don't know, I feel like it could go either way. And it seems like we're managing her better than I feared, so we should be fine either way. Love those power hits. Oh, that's interesting, Grail. So you're saying that, like, the kind of two broadly distinct systems of, like, gameplay flow in the Tales games kind of roughly correspond to different design philosophies from different eras of fighting game? That's super interesting. Well, I mean, look at the company they're coming out of, right? Namco, which obviously had a hand in that whole genre as well, so... I mean, maybe it's more of their direct DNA is shared even in production than we might realize. Yeah, I guess if anyone is going to be ridiculously strong, I will accept, like, Tiamat, Baphomet, Jade, obviously, as we talked about during the Calyx. Yeah, they're definitely a genre and language unto themselves at this point. Which is one of the main reasons that we're doing this series, Tales of Praxis. That does make me wonder, though, whether I should take up a side hobby of playing some fighting games just to get slightly better at the combat in the Tales games. Because I do wish, for all my love for the series, that I were just slightly... mechanically better at the games than I am. Like, obviously I can do them, and when I take my time to, you know, get at the right level and learn the systems, I can do them on the hardest difficulties, but I have no illusions about being good at them. To no one's surprise. Man learns how to literally replicate men under the tutelage of Gelda Nebulum, goes on to defeat demon replica of said Gelda Nebulum. The newspaper headlines in these games write themselves. It's one of the funniest things to me about Vesperia. Speaking of synopses, I had forgotten that like the whole conceit of the synopses in that game is that there's a wonder reporter who like quietly stalks your party in the shadows and like produces news reports about everything they do over the game.
Rose, this isn't working. I promised I'd take you to where Saray is. So shut up and just protect yourself, okay? Rose!
You always gotta check the walls.
You son of a... Stop it! What are you doing? You're gonna kill yourself! How can I die? You said I was so strong! Fool! What was that for? Listen to me! I don't have time for you. Ugh. Hey, let me go! No! Not until you listen to me! You listen to me! We don't have time to
They definitely have their own language of expression in this DLC.
We just became friends!
I was gonna say, like,
I've already lost you. I can't stand the thought of losing you too!
like do a basic safety check before you have an intimate moment.
Ow!
There is time.
Huh?
Look carefully.
Oh! These two are sharing each other's strength. Ow!
You settled down now? This battle will just go on endlessly unless we can defeat both of them at once.
And since our resident psycho killer beat the hell out of one of them, we bought ourselves a bit of time.
They are at least trying to explain. Like, we did winnow the one down to basically no health, and so I guess they need time to do this whole healing, life transfer thing.
We'll give you 3 minutes, okay? Find your dumb answer already and then start acting on it.
This is also a nice way of keeping in like the comedic tone that we were appreciating in Tales of Zestiria of the more serious thing that they've been harping on for the entirety of this DLC so far, where they're on a compressed timeline for Alisha to basically figure out who she is. And I think that's a pretty interesting thing for a piece of JRPG storytelling to make part of its main story, considering that JRPGs are typically so long and recognized by many for their length. For this one to be self-consciously and very explicitly short and thinking about that brevity is, I think, a cool and different tone for it to set. In the same way that we were talking about how like the character dynamics of this party, where they're kind of at each other's throats and always arguing, is very different than the typical JRPG party that you get.
You can tell that Rose was only acting like that out of concern for Alisha.
Even so, she's usually good about not flipping out like that.
Imbecile indeed. It's a side of her that only her truest friends know. Ah, the joys of being young.
Oh, Lila.
Being dumb, more like.
Come on, Alisha. It's okay now. You still crying?
I think it is a benefit. I hate continuing to interrupt this really emotional and kind of moving scene, but while you say that, gave this talk a while ago, and I wrote this article that might interest you, basically about what does DLC storytelling even mean, and what does it look like. I'll share that here. Well, I mean, Grail, you say that, and I guess relative to the main game that is paired with a DLC, I guess that's true, but in terms of raw hours, like, the Xenoblade Chronicles DLCs are basically standalone games, which, especially coming off of those as my most recent like JRPG DLCs, that was a big part of why I didn't know what to expect in terms of length for this. But I think there is an interesting question in terms of DLC where, like, when you think of it as bonus content, you have to kind of wonder, like, well, is there any point to it being a DLC as opposed to just stuff that should have been in the main game in the first place? And now they're just kind of adding as an afterthought because they didn't have the time or resources to put it in the first place. Because if they did just, run out of time and they feel like this is valuable to add, that's okay, but it doesn't really make DLC intrinsically interesting as a form of storytelling. So I set out to ask and think about this question, like, well, are there any stories that work uniquely well as DLC? And I think there are some pretty cool ones. Like what I talk about in that article is I think a lot of Miyazaki's DLC is built in this way. Because if you think of DLC as these optional additions and expansions to games that are kind of paradoxical because they're added on to the game in a way that kind of makes it feel like they should be part of the main game, but they're also extra and you have to go out of your way to add them. And it turns out if you think about the different ways you can make like narrative meaning out of that, there's a range of interesting stories you can tell, and that Miyazaki has told about kind of this very human desire to, like, on the one hand have a complete experience like you would want from a main game, but also to reach beyond that and have even more of it like you would if you were to play a DLC. And I think that's like a useful lens for thinking about stuff like especially the old hunters in Bloodborne, also the not the Ringed City, the first DLC in Dark Souls 3, Ashes of Ariandel. I think it's a good model for that. But I think another interesting way to think about it that I kind of was pitching during the last stream was the idea of, well, what if we think of the DLC as a coda, this kind of additional thing that doesn't fit with the rest of the structure, but wraps stuff up in a short and succinct way. And so to see this kind of talking and making meaning out of that shortness, I think is another thing that it's really well positioned to do because it's a DLC as opposed to just one chapter in the main game. Oh, I know I have that physical release of Torna, but that's exactly what I mean, right? So just with JRPGs, you never know. And maybe it is just a Xenoblade Chronicles thing, but I don't know. I would be willing to play an equally long DLC from a Tales game, put it that way. And so therefore, I didn't know what to expect because I would have been happy as a clam with a succinct episode, which seems to be the case with what we're getting here, or something that's, Torna or future redeemed level in terms of scope and length and aspirations and everything else.
No, I'm not.
So you kind of picked up on what happened to Saray, huh?
Yes.
Well, you should know one thing. He's not dead. Ever since the big showdown with Heldalf, he's been busy purifying the deeply corrupted Maltalis. He knew it meant he would be abandoned in time, but he also knew it was necessary.
Abandoned? In time?
Purification on that scale could take centuries.
Oh, that's such a bummer, Grail. You gotta get one of those,
Someone new appears.
like the little micro
Someone
SD
has
cards for the
the
Switch.
and the will to truly purify this land.
They work super well. I have one of those,
Saray
like
will
the
sleep a
official
dreamless
ones.
sleep with all his senses cut off from the world.
Because doing so allows him to transfer his power to the squires.
Yep. So even now, he's still working as hard as he can to build a future where humans and Seraphim live in peace. Saray can't laugh with his friends or climb around ruins anymore, but he's still there.
Then, the dream he spoke of.
It'll live on, so long as he doesn't forget. That was Saray's answer.
Saray's answer. And you were okay with that?
I'm just here to do the best within my power.
And so, you became a shepherd.
I kinda got a policy against giving up. Alright, I think we made some progress. Now, back to our regularly scheduled beatdowns. Let's go. You wanna see Saray, don't ya?
Wait. There's still something I need to say.
Hmm?
I found it. I know my true answer.
Yeah, I know.
Old Man Saray is a game I would play for sure, Grail.
Let's go share it with Saray.
Oh, that's sweet. So that was interesting. I'm trying to wrap my head around like the facts that we learned in that cutscene. So we already knew that Saray was suspended in time and sleeping and restoring Mautellus and his blessing, but it sounded like Rose became the shepherd in order to keep Saray's dream alive, but it also sounded like, from what Rose said, Saray's like sleep and suspension in time also allows Saray to continue extending his powers throughout the world. So it's kind of like a symbiotic relationship. Because she had that line about how, like, by being suspended in this senseless sleep, he's still able to extend power to his squires. So it's still not totally clear to me whether, like, Rose took up being the shepherd just to, like, support and defend Saray, or if she's actually more directly, like, drawing power from him and kind of inheriting the mantle of the shepherd. Which also, I mean, you would think that the world would support that explanation as well, because we know from the main game and the insights that we saw in the Iris gems that the world can support more than one shepherd at a time, and so it's not like it's a one-to-one. There can only be one shepherd and prime lord relationship, and maybe those shepherds are related to each other in a range of ways. So it seems like while Rose now is sort of like acting as the shepherd who's out there in the world, it's almost in a way as if like she's the shepherd, but the shepherd as Saray's avatar, where like he's still the shepherd who is sleeping and suspended in time, but like extending his powers through her. And she decided to take up the oath in order to keep his dream alive in the world, and help bring that to reality, because she ended up believing in him and authentically wanting to support his dream, which is nice. I mean, if that's the explanation, that feels like a really nice mirror to what we were talking about earlier in the stream in terms of like the evolving relationship between Rose and Alisha and how they saw Saray occupying their lives, because like on this reading of Saray's sleep and the way that Rose has become the shepherd, he's similarly kind of making possible this dream that allows Alisha and Rose to grow into their own and decide what they want to fight in through the intermediary of Saray's dream and what it is that he stands for and cares about, which seems thematically satisfying and pretty damn cool to me. Yeah, well, definitely put a pin in that, Grail, because as we dive into Berseria and I refresh myself on it live, it will be fun to finally start putting all of the pieces of this world together. I'm really excited about that. I think it's going to be really rewarding for us. But yes, back to the serious stuff. Let's fight two Satans. Yeah, they have identical stats. I'm a little concerned about the mechanics of them healing each other, because that does not ever work out well for me in most gaming setups. Well, I was actually curious about that, Grail, because with Alisha finding her answer and getting a new resolve, I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, this was a cool evolution moment in this upcoming fight where she does armatize. But maybe that's just wishful thinking on Aaron's part. Oh, maybe I actually want them focusing on each other.
Right from the start, of course. What? You heard me. If you know it, then say it. I think now's not the time for that. Oh, be careful not to get caught doing it. Got it. We should probably try to keep the faces on the spot. You don't really know it, do you? Sheesh, do you ever let it go? Fine, I don't know it.
This is maybe some of the cutest in-battle dialogue that we've gotten in Zesty so far.
Watch out! They've got some dangerous moves. Yeah, I'll be careful.
I feel like not only is it now harder because there's two of them, but also somehow both of them have figured out a way to level up since that first fight. I am not loving it.
What? Did you really?
Really what?
Yeah, those scepters aren't just for show, Grail, as it turns out.
I have no idea.
See, they just didn't miss the first part, that's all.
Do we have arcane bottles? That would be helpful. Only 4, which is not what I really want to see, but it's better than none. I hated to interrupt the conversation, but that felt important. I know, that's what I was saying last time. Even going back to Vesperia, like, I love so much of what it does, but it feels just so empty once you get used to all of that dialogue in battles and walking around the world. Than to not have it. It just makes the party feel silent in a way that they didn't before we had the example of Zestiria. I hate that Dark Star attack, because I get that it's supposed to be useful for relocating you and you get to reposition on the other side of the enemy. Like, I understand that. But in terms of just maintaining my position in a way that, like, lets me manage my attacks and combos, I feel like that always breaks the flow of my combos. And I don't know how to get a different attack in there. Well, yeah, you would think that, Grail, but I feel like every direction I try to, combo with the physical attack button has Dark Star in there somehow. Let me try a different one. Okay, that seems better. Alright. Fine, you're right. Grail's always right. I'm messing with you. My problem is I really like that Whirlwind Slash, which if you hold the directional stick consistently throughout your combo, that's on the same chain as Dark Star. So I just have to remember, if I want to start with the Whirlwind Slash, I have to go to a different combo combination after that. Combo combination. That sounds redundant, but it's not. It is a combo of combos. Alisha, this fight would be easier if you could stay alive, dear. And we're running low on life bottles. Oh no. I really hope that they don't actually start to heal as we get down here. I'm worried about that. Ooh, that Razor Vortex was nice too. Yeah, well, I'm sure it's the same way in which you're the type of player who tries out all the characters, right, Grail? Similarly, I admire it. It is just so not in my basic DNA with how I grew up on these games. But you're never too late to learn something new. Never too late and never too old. I know, see, especially with the DLC, though, I'm terrible, because, like, they throw you into it with all of these arts for these characters you're not used to using, and, like, I get it would be nice to try all the arts out, but I'm much more the kind where I'm like, I just want to dive into it and get going, and I'm not, if I took the time to learn all the arts and figure out how to actually do that stuff, it would slow me down so much. When you're actually like unlocking the arts one by one across the course of the game, then it's much easier for me to process them all and think about how to use them in a strategy. But when they're all dumped on you at once, that's a bit harder for me. Beginner's mind. That's what the Buddhists call it.
Sorry for the trouble. Well played. I'm in a bind here.
I really don't want to use an all divide if we can avoid it, but I'm a little worried about Alisha.
Alisha! So sorry. Remember, we need to take both of them down at the same
Oh, are they not going to let us kill just one and then take down the other?
time. I know, but it's easier said than done. You just need one chance. 1 second when they're both vulnerable at once. I'm in a bind here.
Yeah, isn't it funny, Grail? I somehow never feel as though my attacks are anywhere close to as devastating as a boss's. Even when the bosses in question are characters from other games. Funny how that happens. Like, I actually don't remember Sophie ever being that OP in Graces back when she was in my party. It's just the way it is, I suppose. Oh, come on. Please land. Thank you. Yeah, in Tales of Praxis so far, I would actually felt, wow, you've passed the inability to speak back to me, Grail. Thank you for that. In Tales of Praxis so far, I actually got that feeling with Tales of the Abyss in the post-game. Like I think we were talking about last time with the super boss and stuff like that. Which was weird because I didn't remember Tales of the Abyss being that way. But that felt like, okay, not through the whole game, but, you know, after beating the final boss and going back and doing everything else, it just felt like the whole team had superpowers in a way that was actually, at that point in the post-game, really satisfying. But I wouldn't say I felt that in any of the other ones of my recent replays. It'll be interesting to see if I experience that when I get to Graces and Hearts, as they are both very much on the list. Okay, getting close. I hope it's not the kind of thing where, like, if we accidentally miss the timing and down one of them before the other, they just reset back to full health or something, because then I might rage quit life. Fuck you, Alisha. Stay upright. We are almost out of life bottles, and then I really don't know what to do. We have to be close now. Okay, they're both at 1,000 health. If that's not close enough to them both being dead, I truly don't know what they want from us. Well, it was more of a war of attrition, which I think is how we've described a lot of fights in Zestiria, but let's not jinx it, but I think we've gotten through here. Okay, one, and the other one. Oh my god, it's really gonna put up a fight with 500 hit points left. It's gonna daze me with 500 hit points left? What a bitch. There we go. Alright, they healed?! I'm so mad. That's true. You and I both know it could be a lot worse than that, Grail. Doesn't make me feel that much better about it, though, if I'm being honest. If it were 30,000, I honestly would just end the stream. That would be beyond my limit. Whew, alright. Wasn't the best, but it wasn't the worst. I hope so.
Okay.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
Alisha! No!
My man!
No! Micleo! Oh, sure, hog the spotlight, show off. Go! Are you ready, Rose? Are you ready?
I was hiding behind a column the whole time, waiting for the coolest moment at which to step in.
Seriously, you guys. What would you
Yeah,
have
that's
if I
true,
hadn't
Grail.
made it in time?
Thank you so much, Micleo.
Long time no see, Alisha.
Oh yeah, that was Impact Cross, wasn't it? Good catch, Grail. It made me think of the combo Mystic Art that Emil and Marta have in Dawn of the New World. No, it wasn't quite what I expected. I feel seen. I feel like the storytellers knew that they were giving us a somewhat different design to the DLC than what we were looking for. Even when I wasn't quite sure what it was that I was looking for.
I see. So that's what happened.
You know, you play them enough, you
That
just,
malevolence I sensed must have been the
like
same
we've said, it's a language, right? You pick up on it and you
here.
learn to
I
read it
sense
and you
some
recognize it
presence
everywhere.
moving quickly away from the ruins.
So it just up and left? How odd.
But we were able to protect this place. That's all that matters.
It doesn't bother you?
Micleo's back, and that can only mean one thing. We're all good here, right?
Yeah, I found a way to seal this area. Camlon will be safe from Hellions from now on.
So little baby Weebo had to take all the heroic parts, huh?
Weebo! Oh.
Great man is one who rises to the occasion.
You came back first. Why didn't you rise to the occasion?
Because he's not a great man, clearly.
Yes, Grail. That's all I have to say to that, yes.
It's your turn to talk.
They have to, right? Yes. Whoa!
That's Saray.
I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't that. That's really cool. Oh, that was worth the giant ruin.
The light that you brought to us is changing the world. Changing it for the better. The peace treaty will soon put an end to the
Speaking of
war.
tropical Sephiroth, am I right?
Centuries of conflict between our two nations will finally be no more than a sad chapter of history. And I will continue to do all in my power to see this through. You have my word. But I realized just now what my true answer should be. A politician, a woman of royalty, a knight, a regular young lady, a friend to everyone gathered here. I want to live as all of these people.
Oh.
At first I thought I was just being selfish, but I lacked the maturity to discard those facets of myself.
Grail, we're gonna throw hands if you keep going like this, man.
I've had colorful disagreements with Rose. Given my proper farewell to Lady Maltran. And had a wonderful journey with dear friends. And that very journey is the reason that I can stand before you now. With my true answer in hand. I've realized I don't need to throw away any part of myself.
Oh.
Saray,
I love this.
thank you.
The journey didn't give you the answer, Alisha. It gave you the strength to believe in the answer you already had.
That's not the only thing it gave me. Rose!
You good?
Yep, let's go.
Alisha, you mean? I'm telling you, it's I think it's just what we talked about during the stream. The fact that they were pulled in different directions by their duties. And the fact that, again, not sure how much of a like sexually and romantically interested being Saray's meant to be coded as.
I just want to eat them up. This pain. I cannot wait until they get a chance to taste it.
So was he like,
I wonder, shall I tear them apart in front of
was he
them?
revived?
Or should I tear him apart and watch them
Or maybe
shriek?
brought back from the edge of death by Simone or something?
When my strength is fully returned, it will be time to feast and to suffer.
Wow. I guess that is kind of interesting because my first thought was Rose is the most professional assassin in this world, so I don't understand how she could have botched killing Lunar. But then my second thought was, but Lunar was also one of her own. He was part of the Scattered Bones, which was part of why his Helionization and alignment with the enemy in the Age of Chaos was so painful for her. So it would make a lot of sense to me if she, she could deliver a killing blow in her sleep backwards with her eyes closed. So the very fact that she didn't manage to kill him shows that she cared about him too much to actually finish the job. I think that would make sense to me as why he's still here. I know, I'm a little confused about the cadence of this. Are they teeing up a second part of this DLC? Are they just leaving some things open-ended? Because I thought based on our views into Simone and Lunar there was going to be more, but that scene with it's over. That's really interesting. I feel like there's more to think about with this DLC than I had expected. Which, I mean, I guess I should have expected that, given that it's a Tales DLC. I think it was interesting to me because when Alisha was saying what her answer was, I had a thought that actually maybe ties into what was going on with Lunar and Simone throughout this little chapter. First of all, just general impression. I mean, I really enjoyed that. I thought it was a great ride. I loved, like we were talking about throughout this in the last one, just how tight it was, because I feel like so much of JRPG storytelling sprawls, which is fine, and I think that's part of the magic of it, but I think seeing something that was so differently constructed was a really interesting picture for me. Well, I don't know, maybe Grail, but the thing that I was thinking about was, so Alisha has that line saying, you know, these are all of these things that are parts of me, and I realize I want to be all of them. I'm not going to give up on or just choose one. Which I think also, by the way, speaks to part of what distinguishes her from Sorey, because Sorey very much like recognized the single duty of the shepherd and like very directly defined his existence by it, as we see at the end there. Which is not bad. It's just a very different kind of perspective, right? But so Alisha said what her answer was, and Grail, I mean, I don't know if you had the same thought, but it felt like very, very reminiscent of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 to me, because without any spoilers for people who are watching, like one of the core themes of that game is the power of recognizing in yourself many different potentials and different roles and effortlessly sliding in and out of them. But I think part of what was interesting and different to me about this than the way that presents in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is that, remember, Alisha is talking about this and, you know, the importance of occupying all of these roles and living different parts of her life on the back of this journey that she just took with Rose, which was, like we talked about, a very emotional journey and at times like a very antagonistic journey where they were always at each other's throats and fighting, and their love language was kind of beating the crap out of each other and being kind of biting and scathing to one another. And I think like there's something interesting to be said, especially in a game and world and fiction that is so self-consciously concerned with the relationship between emotion and willpower and self-concept, about this idea that it's not just we occupy a bunch of roles and should be happy living all of them out, but also the full tapestry of human emotion and our relationship with others should be embraced, and we shouldn't just be seeking out like happy endings or good times or long adventures with, you know, many happy and funny moments like Sorey went through in the main game. Sometimes, you know, like an equally valuable aspect of relationships can be punctuated, short, kind of antagonistic relationships, like the kind that seem to characterize a lot of Alisha and Rose's relationship throughout the course of that DLC. You know what I mean? And so when I think about it through that lens, I also wonder, like, well, maybe part of why they reintroduced these antagonists who are kind of out there in the world and kind of at a loss and trying to find themselves, like we saw with Lunar in the end, trying to reconcile where he'd been with like how he was going to continue to relate to the people from his life that did that to him. And Simone trying to make sense of like, what's my new place in this world now that Heldolf's gone, and what does it mean for me to torture these people? Like, I think the unresolved presence of those antagonists, I think you could almost read as a really cool support of Alicia's answer and what it is that she's actually doing over the course of this DLC, where in the same way that she gets into fights with Rose and goes on an adventure with her, even though they don't always see eye to eye, but they both get value out of it. You could say, I think in a similar light, that there's value to be had even in like the confrontation between her and Simone or her and Maltran. And, you know, she points out stuff like that interaction with Maltran as part of the tapestry of her identity. And I think, just as much as our friends are parts of the tapestry of our identity, so too are our enemies, our adversaries. I guess it's okay for me to spoil a moment in Tales of the Abyss because I think it's just too appropriate not to mention. So I'm going to spoil that for the next second or so. But when at like the very end, after everything's happened in Tales of the Abyss, the fact that like the last thing Luke says to Van is, "Master Van, thank you." There's such a, like, those are the kinds of things that have kept me thinking about that game over and over again over the years. Because I think there is something really like moving and mature about recognizing that an adversary can be a teacher and a special person to you, even if your relationship consists in conflict with them. And so I think the idea that the world that Saray is creating that enables people to be happy with whoever they are and live out their relationships with one another is also one that honors that sense of conflict and people having different agendas. Because remember, like, Lunar was a Hellion, I think, but Simone, crucially, was not. She was a Seraph who just believed things that were deleterious for the world. And Saray thinks it's important, like he said to Simone in the first game, like, evil people should be able to be around too. Like, my mission isn't to kill all the evil people in the world. I just want you to be able to be happy and do what you believe in and not corrupt yourselves with malevolence by tying yourself up into knots and ignoring the things that you really value. So I think in that way, it's like, as I'm thinking about it now, not even just a nice echo and representation of Alicia's answer, but also a really nice final picture of like what it is that Saray was striving for. So as we see him regenerating the world, we're almost seeing like the first step or stage of the, what the world he was trying to create would actually look like with all these different characters in it. Now I'm going to catch up on your messages, Grail. Yeah, well, I mentioned this back in Zestiria. I meant to ask Dan about it, and I forgot. I found myself wondering whether this idea of an answer is something that is like translated in a weird way from the Japanese, or if there's like a different meaning in Japanese, because I feel like that is increasingly becoming a trope or a motif that comes up in a range of JRPGs. Definitely it's a key part of Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And also it doesn't always make sense to me in terms of like the people in the game will start talking about an answer before they've ever raised like what specific question needs to be answered, which makes it feel to me kind of more inaccessible and esoteric than I think it necessarily is supposed to be. But I don't know enough about like the background Japanese or source content to comment on that. Dan would, so I'll try to remember to ask him actually, because I think he would have views on that. I don't think the comment about violence sounds suspect at all, Grail. Actually, I found myself thinking the exact same thing. I think it's one of those things where, especially for people like you and I who have deep familiarity with the series and have played a lot of the games, you don't realize how much characters keep each other at arm's length and rarely physically interact in intimate contexts until you see something like Alisha and Rose coming to blows and are kind of almost stunned by it because it's just like so surprising and unusual, and I think really cathartic. Like I felt the exact same way. I felt, again, especially in a game that is like following up on the journey of this guy who fought so hard and sacrificed himself in order for people to feel free to express whatever they believe in. There was something kind of like surprisingly pure about that just raw, unmediated interaction with these two people who cared enough about each other to fight in that very like human, non-fantasy, non-JRPG way. Like, yeah, these characters are all getting into fighter style beat 'em ups all the time, but that's radically different than the kind of combat, I guess, that you saw between Alisha and Rose throughout that DLC. Yes, and I could not agree more with your last comment, Grail, about this game being deeper than I first thought. I know I said this many times during the Zestiria stream, but I really feel like I kind of did the game and myself a disservice the first time through by playing it at a very superficial level. And I really think this is like a special and I would say unusual case of a JRPG where, of course, lots of JRPGs have depth and symbolism and you can interpret them till the cows come home. But I think this is the kind of game where you need to be like, like people in an English class will talk about actively reading a book, right? Like there's a difference between just letting your eyes run over the pages and actually like actively asking questions and trying to answer them as you go through the book so that you're like actively reading and engaged and kind of uncovering what the book is as you're working through it. I think Zestiria is a game that demands you actively read it because if you're not trying to figure out like what the world really is versus how the characters feel about it and how they're trying to make sense of themselves in relation to that world. Like if you're not going through that struggle of uncovering that with the characters, you're just going to miss what the game is trying to say. Because on a very superficial level, it's very easy to say, like I said at the beginning of the stream of Zestiria, because this was my memory of it, oh yeah, it's a very standard Jesus narrative. It has this King Arthur idea in it. And it's interesting because it's so simple. And I think, now that we've spent more time going back through it and revisiting it and actively reading it, I think that's just a wrong characterization. But I think it's interestingly wrong because I think it is a game that has that level of just superficial simplicity, but it's deceptive in that way, right? Because it's like, it's challenging you to want to unpack that. And the more you look at the content of the game, it's like, very clear from the early stages, like, yeah, there's this idea of malevolence and there's the shepherd and you have to overcome it. And like everyone at the beginning of the game thinks pretty directly, like even the narrator who's introducing it to you is like, yeah, classic battle between like good and evil. This happens throughout time. So you have it in your head that it's going to be coded as like very straightforward moralization. And it's not until you start peeling back the layers in the journey of like, well, actually, malevolence isn't the same thing as evil. It's this disconnection between what you believe in and what you do. And actually, not all evil people are malevolent. And some good people are malevolent. And the more you kind of try to figure out those concepts as they become more complicated, that's when we start to uncover like what the game, I think, is really trying to say, what it is their characters go through, and the kind of depth and interesting stuff that would kind of be easier to get on a first, less engaged read of many other JRPGs that don't tell their story in the way that Zestiria does. So I'm totally with you. I agree with that. Catching up on your messages again, Grail. Characters know what the question is because yeah, I don't think that's a terrible comparison, Grail. I think that's fair. And especially in a world like this, with all that we were just talking about in terms of like the way the characters are constantly trying to interrogate what this world really is and what their role in it is and how they ought to behave. I think it's more believable than many other JRPGs or stories that these characters are all trying to like kind of answer the question of existence, so to speak, in the way that, an existentialist philosopher like Camus or someone would think about it and think of that as like the question that demands an answer, like what is it to live and why live rather than die? So I think there is something kind of nice and touching and right about the idea that it's kind of subliminally on everyone's mind, even though they don't always put a name to it. Yeah, well, that's why I wrote that whole study of Abyss, and I think it's why we're doing Tales of Praxis, right? These games are magical because they can give so much to players just on a first cursory playthrough, but also, and even more so, I'd say, because you can come back to it as many times as you want and always uncover something that is different and more rewarding, whether that's just new game pluses that let you see different side quests and prioritize different relationships, or just playing it in a different context, asking different questions, digging a little bit deeper. And you can't always count on that extra work being rewarded when you go into a story. Sometimes, like, there wasn't that much care put into it, or some stories really are just simple, and that's okay. Not every story needs to be incredibly multi-layered in terms of its exegetical nature, but these games are right. These games, like, they have different strata of depth, the way that, like, an archaeologist, speaking of things like ruins and excavation, would dig down to different layers and, like, uncover different things that together tell a richer story of the history of the world and how these different things relate to each other. You can do the exact same thing with these games, which is a big part of why I wanted to spend the time not just to write and think about them, but to actually replay them in this kind of book club context that we had never done before. So I'm really glad that we're actually getting different perspectives on them through the stream, as I'd hoped, and I'm glad you feel that too, Grail. I'm glad it's not just me in my corner feeling that way. So I appreciate that. Yeah, we could spend like 3 to 30 more hours talking just about Tales of the Abyss, and I would be happy to. But I think what you say about Luke calling Van Master is another great example of why these games are worth revisiting, not just to replay them in different contexts, but especially as you age and get, not just a different perspective on these stories and games, but also on the world and as your life, as you experience more things and just embody a different perspective, speaking of perspectives, right, than you did when you first played them. Because I had a very similar experience when I first played. I remembered being kind of frustrated and confused by, like, man, this guy deeply betrayed Luke. Like, why would he still be calling him master? But it's one of those things where, again, if you read it closely and actively, especially with a bit more perspective, the kind that comes with age, I would say, it's very clear that that's actually a big part of the kind of story Tales of the Abyss is trying to tell. And, in fact, part of Luke's arc, because he doesn't just call Master Van Master all the way through. When he's betrayed by Van, he wrestles with that. He ultimately does come to stand up to and resist Van. And when they fight the first time, Luke throws away the Master and just calls him Van. And that, too, is a poignant moment. But I think it's all the more poignant and shows more depth when Luke continues to evolve into what Van himself recognizes, I would say correctly, before the final confrontation, as a fully formed human being, I think is Van's line. I might be paraphrasing him, but he says to Luke basically, yeah, you're now a full human, in a way that I think, and I argue in my article about it, is kind of uniquely possible, not just because of Luke's spiritual journey through the game, but also because of the role that Master Van played in it, as a true spiritual master. And I think the betrayal and the way in which Luke overcomes that to free Lorelei from Van can all be understood as a kind of esoteric teaching that makes that possible, which ties right back into what we were talking about with the value of antagonism as it's reflected here in Zestiria, right? I think something that I'm recognizing as we're talking through this is kind of a special and interesting theme in several of these Tales games, is the idea that antagonists can be uniquely valuable to the world and even to the people whom they antagonize, right? And I think the appreciation that Luke shows for Van at the last is a great model of that. And as players, we ought to figure out, like, how to understand the story in such a way that we can be there with Luke sharing in that perspective, which is easier said than done, but that's a big part of why I think that game can actually be quite literally a spiritual practice. I'm even thinking of replaying it again after I just replayed it, because it's like a meditative act. I think the more time you spend with it, just undergoing the particular unlocking and reflection on the Sephiroth that it makes possible through its narrative, I think you can achieve not just insight about its story, but yourself and your place in the world in a really cool and very applicable way. It's what you said the other night, right, Grail? Like, name Tales antagonist, and you can put up on the board at least 5 incredibly quotable and moving lines. It's incredible, the writing in general in this series, but especially the way that those ultimate antagonists are written, and just breathtaking. I was talking with Dan about Tales of Symphonia after he finished it, and we ended up, for so many reasons, talking about Mythos, and I like pulled one of Mythos's lines out of my head without even realizing that it was something that I had memorized. But it was like word for word, and it came up because we were talking about, I think, Mythos's relationship with Genus. And just that line, like the last thing Mythos says before he disappears, farewell, my shadow, you who stand at the end of the road I chose not to walk down. Oh, poetry. Are you kidding me? Like, people who still fail to recognize the artistic value of video games simply aren't paying attention. And no more needs to be said about it than that. It is demonstrably not only an art form, but in fact, I would say one of the most significant art forms and influential art forms, and potentially positive art forms of our modern time, period. Yeah, I shouted this out during the battle, Grail. We might have been distracted by the combat, so we might have missed it. But I don't think it's like symbolically the same thing. But there's a super like talk about moments in games echoing other moments. Like there's a line I think that Mikleo said during that battle of like we need to figure out a way to free Mautellus, or like break the connection between Mautellus and Heldolf in order to like make Heldolf vulnerable. It's like very, very similar to, releasing Lorelei from Van's body at the end of Tales of the Abyss. I really enjoyed that. Yeah, that's a great one too. Talk about endlessly quotable. I think, okay, thinking about lines from Zestiria, that's a great question. I think there are kind of two, at least right now, that I'm thinking about. One was the line that Rose quoted from Mikleo, "We have different sights but the same vision." I think that's just a really like poetic and memorable turn of phrase for me, and I think it succinctly captures a lot of what we've been talking about in terms of the value of different perspectives and how that can actually empower relationships as opposed to fracture relationships. And then the other one is not a line with that much rhetorical eloquence behind it, and I don't remember the exact phrasing of it, but the one that Saray says to Simone after they beat her, which is like so disarmingly down to earth for the shepherd saying it, which is part of why I think it's so endearing to me, where he says something like, I don't really know the right way to say this, but I think what I want to tell you is if you want to be evil, that's okay. You can still stick around. You don't have to die. Because he was talking about how Simone, like the first time they confronted her, raised this challenge of what about people like Dezel who just bring chaos and suffering wherever they go? Should they just annihilate themselves? And I think that's really like touchingly heartfelt in the sentiment and how sort of underwritten it is. And I think it's similarly to the line about different sights, same perspective, cuts to the heart of what Zestiria is all about, where it's sort of more important to build a society and culture and network of relationships where you can be honest with yourself and others about what you care about and what you want to contribute to the world, than everyone being concerned with fighting evil or defending the intrinsically good. Because I think, actually, as I say it that way, I think that's almost part of what I'll remember Zestiria for going forward, and what I'll try to hold in my mind as we get on to Berseria. I think there's like, as we go through all the towns in Zestiria and see these different models of different civilizations and different forms of corruption, I think there's a sense in which like there's an artifice of morality where people say that they care about good or evil or protecting values, and there's a real risk of that becoming like politicized and just being a means of control rather than actually trying to pursue the good or benefit society or see value in others. And so I think there's an interesting way in which like what Saray and the party are trying to do is like bring morality down from like the political and global discourse and rhetoric into like the focus on individual human action and value, right? I think so much of it comes down to people understanding what they value and acting on that. But then also, like we saw in that small but I think really important moment in the DLC when the party was talking about Simone, recognizing that other people see value in you, because that's really a big part of what enables someone to be a person and feel confident to assign value to other things and decide what to do, right? That is, I think, itself another way of reading the conclusion with Alisha, where everyone says like, yeah, you know, you already knew your answer. You just needed the confidence to actually say it and realize it yourself. Where does that confidence come from? It comes from that journey that she took with Rose and the Seraphim and everyone who really saw and valued her in a range of unique ways across those relationships that ranged from the antagonistic to the supportive to everything in between. So it's like being seen by others enables you to act as a person and a moral agent in a way that you wouldn't otherwise get, which again, like to your earlier point, Grail, like that's a much more interesting and nuanced thing than I initially thought this game said. So I'm really impressed and happy with that, and excited to see how Tales of Berseria may further contribute to that, or subvert it, or have a conversation with it after this. It's going to be so much freaking fun. Yeah, I mean, that's my way of saying field day. I'm catching up on your messages again. And the funny thing, Grail, is like I was excited to do this even before we had replayed Zestiria and done the DLC. And now that we have that fresh and we've had this conversation, like I am only all the more excited for Berseria. It's going to be a romp in so many ways. So I'm glad you're replaying it too, to have it fresh. I know that we are going to have a lot of really cool conversations about it. Yeah, you know, I was thinking about that too, because when I think about things that characterize the Tales series, like the humanization of monsters is not one of the first things that I think of, but it is a through line in so many of the stories. Like you have people being made into monsters through X-Spheres and Symphonia. You have the whole idea of what you took to be monsters and enemies actually underpinning the entire ecosystem of the world and its mana flow in Dawn of the New World. You have monsters as the source of lenses and basically like the focal point of all like power struggles across human society throughout the years in Tales of Destiny. You have the question of what is a monster in so many different philosophical senses in Zestiria, between Hellions and evil people and, just regular people, Lords of Calamity. So a clear and pressing question here. There was another one I was thinking of. There was some reason it came up in Berseria that was interesting to me. Or it might just be that I kept thinking they were going to do something interesting with it in Vesperia, and then they didn't quite. Of course, there's everything with the Entelecheia and some people coding them as monsters and the whole drama between them and the hunting blades who try to hunt them down for various reasons. I don't think they go that much into the kind of the underpinning of the monsters that populate the world. But yes, anyway, long story short, I could sit here and think more about that for a while too, but it's, JRPGs are so good for those sorts of stories, right? And I think it's also the other half of something that I would say is characteristic of the Tales games at a glance, which is the way in which characters will routinely wrestle with the meaning of killing. Like I always come back to that really kind of alarming scene on the Tartarus. That's the name of the ship in Tales of the Abyss, right? The Tartarus. Yeah, I had a stroke moment there. But where Luke is isolated from the rest of the group, and is confronted by a soldier and has to kill him, and he's so anxious. The way that scene is scored and the camera angle, despite being like a relatively retro game at this point, it makes the player feel so claustrophobic and pressured in the way that Luke would. And that single moment of confronting an enemy and having to kill him tees up so much of what the game has to say about the meaning of life and the meaning of death and everything in between. Just amazing meditations that we could talk about all night. I love it. Yeah, it's a big thing in Arise too, for sure. Yep, that's one that I need to replay in short order here as well. That's certainly on my list. Yeah, Abyss is peak fiction. That's the beginning and end of this. I don't know. I was so coy about picking my favorite at the beginning of this, and I always am. But maybe I should just own at this point that, at least with the games that I've played in recent memory, Abyss is my favorite. I feel like it's fair for me to say that at this point, so I will try to own that more going on, Grail. Thank you for giving me crap about that. That is true about Vesperia, but they integrate that into the story more than I expected or remembered, because there's actually a skit about it. That's part of what made me think about it. It was like the party is wandering around at one point and they're like, man, I really thought this would be like an impossible thing to go on an adventure across the world because everyone's so afraid of monsters, but we're doing fine. So I think it's something that the story is aware of. And we might just have to dedicate a stream to thinking and talking through Vesperia. Maybe even I might think about doing that this Friday, because I feel like it would be nice to kick off Berseria on a Monday and give people time to just rest and think before we do that. But, we've talked about the difficulty in putting together all the pieces of the plot. And I think one way in which something like the monsters is an interesting sort of contributory factor to that is that, I think there is a way in which the game is saying, like, people are kind of laboring under this false assumption that they're unsafe and therefore need the protection of the Blastia, which makes everyone think they're more dependent on these Blastia than they actually have to be, which is part of what sets up the whole kind of out of balance world ecosystem, because humans aren't standing on their own 2 feet in the way that they could if they believed in themselves, which is a very kind of like JRPG theme, and I'm sure we could, talk through it and make it more nuanced as we thought more about the nuances of Vesperia, but that does seem to be the kind of thing that kind of carries as a through line throughout the course of the game so far. Whoa, that's so interesting, Grail. I mean, yeah, if you'd ever love to share more about your writing, especially knowing that the Tales games and Abyss are a big part of your inspiration, I'd love to know more about that, or if you have any of it, published, I'd love to check it out. It's so cool that you not only engage with this stuff as a gamer and a thinker, but as a writer. Like that's really special, and I got mad respect for that. Yeah, I mean, you mean just like jumping into my current playthrough of Vesperia for like a 3-hour block on the stream? I guess there's nothing stopping us from doing that, because I mean, I am at the conclusion. It just, like, for you and I feel like that would be fun, but on the off chance that there are people out there who are actually treating this as a book club, I would feel bad about like diving into the end of one of these games with very little context. I will say, if it's not clear from the time we've been spending together, I've been tremendously enjoying Tales of Praxis, especially the streaming part of it, and I think we're definitely picking up steam as we continue to go on with that. So I would not say that my having played some of these games as part of Tales of Praxis on my own would rule them out for future streams. So if we decided, like, after Berseria, oh, maybe it would be really great to jump into Vesperia, because that has, interesting common ground between Symphonia and Abyss, and maybe even some themes from Zestiria that we can kind of talk about in conversation. Or if we wanted to actually play through Tales of the Abyss for all that we've been talking about it, I would be more than down for that too. So, I mean, I'm thinking through the things that I would like to play in the order in which I'd like to do them, but I mean, I'm also happy to yield to people's recommendations. I got the idea for doing Zestiria and Berseria because someone else recommended Zestiria as the next one to do. So happy to put our thinking caps about that on as well as we go forward. Well, I will say, I mean, I typically spend more time in terms of hours with these games than what I've been doing on the stream, just because I feel like this is a good cadence and a nice clip for the stream. Or if you're talking about just the number of hours and like the short amount of time in terms of days that it takes me to do something like get through Vesperia, that's just because I'm a madman. Like, I mean, I basically do two things right now. I do my day job and I do philosophy of video games. And right now I'm mostly in research mode in terms of playing as opposed to writing. So, I mean, that's most of my time. And it's a great way to spend my time, all the more so for being able to work in this really rewarding area of philosophy with like-minded gamers who really appreciate thinking about storytelling in this way. So for real, I mean, I get so much value out of that, Grail. I'm glad you've been enjoying it too. And world building is such a unique and unusual and valuable skill. So, I mean, props to you for that. I would really love to check some of that out. I think for now, this is going to be as good a note as any for wrapping this up. I'm sure we could talk more about all of the Tales games for many more hours. I'm also confident that we will. So I'm looking forward to much more of that in the days and weeks and months to come. It's going to be a fun time ahead. Grail, yeah, I'll shout you out one more time. As always, thank you, my friend. Shout out also to our new dear friend, whose username I have to pull back, Itchy and Titchy, my new European friend. Thank you so much for joining in. I'm really glad you enjoyed what you came across. Hope to see you back as well. This is the capstone of our time with Tales of Zestiria. We played through the whole main game. We didn't get to see Saray suspended with Mautellus as we see them here on this title screen, so shaking my fist at a cloud for that, but really loved that DLC, which we have now also wrapped up. And it's fun and nice in no small part thanks to you, Grail. So seriously, thank you as always. I'm glad that we spent a little time after Zestiria to talk about our thoughts on that. I'm glad we unpacked it more at the end of this DLC and also thought about the DLC, because one of the things that I've been saying throughout this, and I'll say again as we're now turning to the next one, is it is so rewarding and interesting in the same way that we've been talking about unpacking more layers of Zestiria to think about a sequence of related games in a single world like Zestiria and Berseria, both on their own terms and what they're trying to say as a single story, and then also as multiple works in conversation with one another. I think oftentimes if you're not careful and you play through a series in quick succession, it's easy to just think of it as a single story that's saying one thing. That's really not true, right? It's a bunch of different stories that all have their own messages and plot beats and arcs, and takeaway messages at the end that then also create a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. So we have our views and thoughts on Zestiria. We've spelled those out. I'll probably write about them at some point. We talked about how the DLC, I would say does, as I was hoping, act as an interesting coda to elaborate on those ideas in a way that is not quite contained in the main game, but a natural and interesting extension of it. And now we'll see what Berseria has to say on its own terms, and also how when we take those messages and put them in conversation with Zestiria, we might get some new insights that we wouldn't get if we didn't have the benefit of thinking about those games in the vacuum first. That's right. We are going to, I won't spoil too much for those who haven't been there, but as Grail suggests, we are on to a very different look into the same world in the next game. And my only teaser for that is when I played Berseria for the first time when it came out. I hadn't played Zestiria since it came out, I think 2 or 3 years earlier. I had put Zestiria out of my mind because, like I said, I hadn't really given it a fair amount of thought when I first played it. And when I first sat down to play Berseria, it took me a really long time to realize that it was even taking place in the same world as we have in Tales of Zestiria. So that's how different it feels going into it. But don't take my word for it. Don't take Grail's word for it. We're going to find out ourselves really soon. I'm going to say, I'll put more details on the actual stream schedule on the site's social. So, keep your eyes peeled on Twitter or Facebook or what have you as I figure out what that's going to look like. I am almost certain that we will kick off Berseria on Monday. So I feel like that's a good time to roll that out. But I'll sit with this and sleep on it and see whether it maybe makes more sense to just go ahead and kick it off on Friday anyway, because I'm excited. I'm really into this, and I'm jazzed after that DLC. So anyway, stay tuned. Back on the same time on Friday. Wow, good time to cut the stream because I'm clearly losing my ability to speak. Same time Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Be here, Tales of Praxis. We'll be doing something fun, no matter what it might be. Grail, thank you. Yes, I'll see you then. Looking forward to you, my stalwart and reliable book club companion here. Hope to see some other faces too. We'll have a good conversation and some good gaming adventures. Till then, my friends, I'm Aaron Suduko, founder of With a Terrible Fate. This has been Tales of Praxis. Game well. I'll see you on Friday. Cheers.